different. That's when it appeared, a panel of pale green light, floating over my chest, clean and still, like an app designed by something that had been watching me fail for a very long time. Mint system activated. It listed my power, too, and my rank and my money. My name is Choi Min-soo, and in a world where cultivation decides everything, I was the one everyone agreed was going nowhere. Vitality score 2. The examiner wrote it without even looking up, the way you'd stamp a package for the wrong address. 2, she said. Next. Cha Jin-woo was there that day. He's a rich, second-generation heir, the kind who never once worked for a single thing he owns, and he'd made a hobby out of reminding me what I wasn't. 2, he said, loud enough for half the courtyard. At this rate, you'll die of old age before you hit 5. Everyone laughed. I'd learned by then not to answer back. Not because he was strong, but because the people who laughed were the ones who'd decide if I got work tomorrow. In a city that runs on power and money, a broke kid with a score of 2 has exactly one job: keep his head down. The job was mopping floors and hauling supply crates for a guild that wouldn't even let me stand at the door. 12 hours for pocket change. The manager called me 2 instead of my name, because that was the score on my card, and he figured it was the only part of me worth remembering. I told myself it was temporary. It always was. But the rent was due, and the last of my savings had gone to a bus pass and a cheap meal I'd skipped anyway, and the truth sat in my chest like a stone. Temporary had lasted 3 years, and it wasn't temporary. It was just my life. At the end of the shift, I counted my pay in the back alley and came up short again. A uniform fee that only ever got taken out of my envelope. I didn't fight it. A broke kid with a score of 2 doesn't fight anything. That was the rule, and I'd learned it down to my bones. The eviction notice was taped to my door, and the whole time I read it, I was doing math in my head. Rent, bus fare, the medicine for my mother's hands, the money that was already gone. No matter how I moved the numbers around, they always ended the same: not enough. I sat on the mattress in the dark with my one bag and thought about the people who'd told me cultivation was the only way out. As if a score of 2 could ever cultivate anything. As if the pills and manuals and spirit stones weren't bought and sold like everything else in this city by people who already had money. That was the thing nobody said out loud. The path to power had a price tag, and I couldn't even afford the floor. I lay there staring at the ceiling, broke, tired, and 21 years old, and I gave up. Not loudly, just the quiet kind where you stop pretending tomorrow will be different. That's when it appeared, a panel of pale green light, floating over my chest, clean and still, like an app designed by something that had been watching me fail for a very long time. Mint system activated. It listed my power, 2, and my rank and my money, which was 0, and something called heat, which was also 0. The Mint system prints currency. I read it 3 times in the dark. Prints currency. Not grants it, not rewards it, prints it. I sat up slowly because for the first time in my life, a number on a screen was pointed at the one thing I had never, not once, been able to get my hands on. Then I read the fine print and my stomach dropped. The money was counterfeit. Every bill I printed raised my heat, an exposure meter that marked me for the banks, the government, and the families who owned the money supply. And there was a daily quota locked to my rank. I was a counterfeiter now, on the strength of a light in the dark. The rules were laid out like a contract. The system forges currency indistinguishable from legal tender. It doesn't conjure value, it fakes it. The daily quota is tied to rank. The stronger I got, the more I could print. And heat never resets. It only ever climbs. I understood the trap the way only a broke person can. Counterfeit cash isn't a fortune, it's a fuse. Spend too much, too fast, and the serial numbers repeat. The cash flows spike, and the people who own the money come looking. But the alternative was the eviction notice on my door and a score of 2. The quota was the cleverest part. Rank 1 could print $240 a day. Pocket change to Jin-woo, who'd spend that on lunch without blinking. But to me, to a man who'd gone hungry for the price of a bus ticket, it was the difference between nothing and something. I reached for it. The first bill came out warm, like it had just been minted. I held it up to the window light, my hands shaking, and it was perfect. The ink, the the paper, the watermark. $240. The most money I'd held in one place in 3 years. Then the heat meter ticked. 0 to 1. A single digit, small enough to ignore, but I felt it the way you feel a floorboard creak in a house you thought was empty. Every print, the system reminded me, was a bill sent out into the world with my fingerprints on it. I counted the stack twice, then a third time, and I laughed. A real laugh. The first one and longer than I could remember. A broke loser, a shuttered room, and a money printer that was already, quietly, counting the cost of every bill. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I had a number that worked for me. Yujin was the one person who still came around. We'd grown up in the same slum, gone hungry on the same street corners, and she'd stayed when everyone else decided a score of 2 was contagious. She let herself in with the spare key, and she froze in the doorway when she saw the money on the mattress. "Where did you get that?" she asked, and I heard the fear in it before I heard the question. Yujin doesn't scare easy, but she knows exactly what happens to broke kids who suddenly have money in this city. The police, the loan sharks, the questions nobody survives. "Min-soo," she said, "tell me you didn't do something stupid." I almost told her everything, right there. The system, the printer, the heat. But the words wouldn't come, because saying them out loud would make them real, and some part of me still thought I could unsee it. So I told her the one thing that was true. I'm going to be okay. She didn't believe me. Neither did I. She sat down on the mattress and looked at me the way she used to when we were kids, like she was deciding whether to save me or shake me. "Whatever it is," she said finally, "you don't have to do it alone. You know that, right? You've never had to do it alone." That was Yujin. She didn't ask for a cut or a favor or an explanation she was owed. She asked me not to disappear into whatever I'd found. It was the only thing in the room worth more than the money, and I almost missed it because I'd spent so long learning to count the wrong things. I walked her to the door and promised I'd be careful, and I meant it as much as a man with a money printer can mean anything. As she left, she glanced back once, and I saw it on her face. She wasn't afraid of the money. She was afraid of what it would turn me into. After she left, I sat with the money and thought about what it was actually for. Power. That's the whole game. The pills, the manuals, the spirit stones, they're all for sale, and I finally had a way to buy them. There's a black market for it, off the books, where nobody asks where the cash came from. I'd heard the name 100 times from the guild's back rooms. A broker who takes cash and doesn't ask questions. The kind of person a broke kid was never supposed to meet. But I wasn't broke anymore, and that changed the math of everything. "If money is power," I said to the empty room, "and I can print money." I didn't finish the sentence. It was too big. But for the first time since the examiner said 2, I let myself think it all the way through. A broke loser with a score of 2, and the whole city's worth of strength, one printed bill at a time. Far across the city, Cha Jin-woo was spending a fortune on dinner without once thinking about it, the way I once couldn't think about a bus ticket. He raised a glass to a table of rich kids and laughed about the broke loser with the score of 2, and nobody at the table knew I was holding the one thing their money couldn't buy. The Mint Systems panel still floated in the corner of my eye, quiet and patient, and I understood, finally, what it had been telling me. The city runs on money, and money runs on the people who print it. For my whole life, I'd been the one the system was printed against. Now the printer was mine. $240, I whispered, counting the stack one last time. It was nothing to Jin-woo, but it was the first bill of the rest of my life, and somewhere in the city, a machine had already started counting the cost of every one after it. They'd come for me eventually. Let them. For the first time, I'd be worth coming for. The broker's shop was exactly where the guild's back room said it would be, down an alley that smelled of rust and cheap medicine, behind a door that had no sign. I went in holding a stack of bills that didn't exist, and hoped the man behind the counter wouldn't ask where they came from. He didn't. That's the whole point of a black market. He counted my money twice, weighed it in his hand, and slid a small wooden box across the counter. "Vitality pills," he said. "Low grade, but for a score of 2, they'll feel like a miracle." I opened the box and looked at the 4 pills, dull and gray, resting in felt. A week of my life's worth of money for 4 gray pills. I'd never bought anything in my life that cost that much, and I bought it with cash that had been printed in the air over my mattress the night before. Back in my room, I swallowed the first pill and waited. The panel above me flickered, and then it happened. A warmth moving through me, slow and real, like blood remembering how to run. I watched my power score climb for the first time in my life. 2, it had said, for as long as I could remember. Now it said something else. 4 pills, 1 a night. By the 4th, the score had stopped being a joke. 41. Not enough to matter to anyone who mattered, but more than I'd ever had. I sat on the mattress and stared at the number, and I understood the whole game for the first time. It was never that I couldn't cultivate. I just couldn't afford to. I laughed until I almost couldn't stop, because the truth was that ugly. Every genius in this city was standing on a pile of pills they never had to think about. And I, the broke loser with a score of 2, had just bought my way onto the first rung. Then the heat meter moved, 1 to 2. I watched it tick and felt the room get smaller. The system had warned me. Every bill, every purchase, every pill paid for with forged cash was a signal sent out into the city, and somewhere, someone was built to read those signals. The broker didn't know my name, but he knew my face now, and he knew I paid in cash, in bills that were all too clean. That's the cost nobody tells you about counterfeit money. It doesn't just spend like real cash. It spends like real cash that someone, somewhere, is already looking for. I told myself 2 points of heat was nothing. A crack in a wall nobody was watching. But I felt it anyway, the way you feel a floorboard creak in a house you thought was empty. The system was patient. It didn't need to warn me twice. She was at the counter when I went back for more. A woman in a worn lab coat, curvy and composed, her long dark hair pulled back, thin glasses sliding down her nose. She was turning one of my empty vials over in her hands, the way you'd examine a coin you don't trust. "You bought low-grade vitality pills?" she said, not looking up. 4 of them, and you're back for more already? It wasn't a question, it was a diagnosis. I felt the heat meter twitch in the corner of my eye before I could stop myself from glancing at it. "What's it to you?" I asked. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were sharp and tired at the same time. "It means either you found a supplier who undercuts everyone in the district," she said, "or you have more money than a boy with your clothes should have. I'm trying to decide which one makes you more interesting." Her name was Ha-Yoon-seo, and she'd been an alchemist, a real one, before her family's sect was ruined and she was thrown out with the rest of them. She could read a pill's provenance the way I could read a price tag, instantly and with contempt for anyone who faked it. She turned the vial in the light and went still. "These were paid for in cash," she said slowly. "New bills, no wear, the kind of cash that hasn't circulated." She set the vial down and looked at me for a long moment. "Money like that doesn't come from work, Min-soo. It comes from somewhere it shouldn't." My blood went cold. She'd used my name. She'd been watching me, or asking around, or both. I opened my mouth to lie and found nothing there. Because she was right, and she knew it, and the worst part was that she didn't look scared of me. She looked interested. I expected her to threaten me, or turn me in, or name a price for her silence. She did none of it. She just looked at me the way you look at a mechanism you've never seen before, and she said, "Relax. If I wanted the reward for a counterfeiter, I'd have stopped asking questions and started dialing." "So what do you want?" I asked. She smiled, and it was a tired smile, the kind that's forgotten how to be warm. "I want to know how you're still alive. A broke kid printing money in a city that hangs people for 1/10 of what you're doing. That's not luck. That's either a very good system or a very short plan." It was the first time anyone had looked at what I was doing and seen a system instead of a crime. It was also the first time I realized the truth of her. She wasn't a threat. She was a mirror. The world had thrown her away the same way it had thrown me, and she'd spent every day since figuring out how things actually worked. We sat in the back of the shop, the vial between us, and she laid out what she'd figured. "Raw cash is worthless to someone who doesn't know how to spend it," she said. "The broker sells you low-grade pills at 3 times the price because you look like a mark. A real alchemist could turn that same money into 10 times the power." "And you're a real alchemist," I said. "The discarded kind," she answered, and the word landed between us like something we both recognized. I was the best in my sect before they burned it. Now I mix cold remedies for coin and watch idiots like you overpay for gray pills. Two discarded people, sizing each other up over a table of counterfeit cash. She didn't trust me, and I didn't trust her, but we understood each other in a way the people who'd thrown us away never would. That was the first real thing that had happened to me in years, and I almost didn't recognize it. Far across the city, Cha Jin-woo heard the rumor before I did. A broke kid from the slums, suddenly buying cultivation pills in the black market. It reached him through the same channels everything reached him, through money and through the people who wanted to be owed a favor by a rich man. Min-soo, he said to the room, like the name tasted bad. The kid with the score of 2, who he'd spent years stepping over. Now the kid had money, and money was the one thing Jin-woo believed he owned by right. It didn't make him afraid, it made him disgusted. He told himself it was nothing, a windfall, a loan, a lucky break. But the rumor itched at him the way only the wrong people rising ever does. So he did what people like Jin-woo do when they're mildly bothered. He decided to find out where the money came from and knock the broke loser back down to where he belonged. On the walk home, I did the math the system was trying to teach me. The pills were cheap. The trail they left was not. Every purchase was a thread, and I was stitching a rope out of them. And at the far end of that rope, eventually, would be a hand that knew exactly what it was holding. That's the counterfeit trap, not the printing, the spending. You can forge a fortune in a night, but the moment you try to use it, you start leaving a shape behind, a pattern of new bills, of cash with no history, of a boy who shouldn't have it. I was building the very evidence that would hang me. I looked at my power score, 41, and I understood the bargain I'd made. I'd traded my invisibility for the first real strength of my life. The question the city was about to ask was simple, and I didn't have an answer yet. Was I smart enough to keep the strength without handing over the rope? Somewhere in the central bank, in a room full of screens and quiet men, a clerk noticed something, a blip, a few too many new bills moving through one district, a pattern too clean to be coincidence. He almost scrolled past it, most anomalies or nothing, but something about it made him stop. He flagged it, that's all, one line in a report that would sit on a desk until the morning. But the system in the corner of my eye felt it, the way a storm feels its first drop of rain. The counterfeiting division had its first ghost. They just didn't know it yet. I was in my room, counting what was left of the money, when the heat meter held steady at 2, and I understood. The city hadn't come for me yet, but it had begun to turn its head. I had a printer and 41 points of power, and the first real enemy I'd ever had, the pattern I was leaving behind. It would only get louder from here. Yoon-seo laid it out like a teacher who'd been waiting years for a student worth the chalk. Raw cash is worthless to someone who doesn't know how to spend it, she said again. And this time she meant it as a contract. The broker sells you gray pills and keeps the difference. I can turn the same money into real progress. She spread a row of vials on the table. Different grades, different colors, each one labeled in her own small hand. This is a purity hierarchy. Most people buy whatever glows. That's how the market eats them. The trick is knowing exactly how far one bill goes and never paying for what the pill doesn't actually do. And you'll teach me this out of kindness? I asked. She laughed, short and dry. Out of percentage. You bring the money, I bring the method. We both climb. But first, she looked at me over her glasses. You tell me where the money comes from, the whole truth, or I walk, and you keep eating gray pills until the market kills you. I sat there for a long moment, turning the risk over in my head. Trusting her was the first time I'd share the secret, and if I was wrong about her, it would end me. But the truth was, I was already dead. A score of 2 with a printer and no idea how to spend it. I needed her more than she needed me. So I showed her. I let the mint green panel surface in the air between us, and I printed a bill right there on the table where the light could catch it. She went very still, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked like what she actually was, someone watching a mechanism she'd only ever read about. A money printer, she breathed. She reached out and took the bill, held it to the light, and I saw her put a dozen things together at once. Then she did the thing I'd been most afraid of. She smiled. "Oh," she said, "we are going to be a problem for a lot of very rich people." She didn't ask how it worked, or where it came from, or whether it was safe. She asked the only question that mattered to someone like her. "What does it cost you?" And I told her, The heat, the exposure, the quota, the way every bill was a signal. I expected her to flinch. She just nodded. Every tool has a price, she said. The trick is never paying more than the tool is worth. She looked at the money on the table, then back at me. Here's my price. I take 15% of everything we make, and I get the truth, always. No more surprises. You keep the printer and the power. I keep the method and my cut. I almost laughed at how small her number was. 15% to turn gray pill scraps into real cultivation. But that was Min-soo. She priced the work, not the desperation. Deal, I said. And just like that, a broke loser and a discarded alchemist went into business with money that didn't exist. We worked through the night in a room she rented by the week, and she did exactly what she'd promised. Under her hands, the same money the broker had wasted on gray pills became something else. A clear solution, a careful mixture, a dose that hit like a train instead of a whisper. I swallowed it and felt the difference immediately. Not the slow warmth of the gray pills, but a clean, bright surge that moved through me like it had been waiting for instructions. My power score climbed, 41, then higher still, and when it stopped, I wasn't a score of 2 anymore. 137, and beneath it, a second number I'd never had. My rank ticked from trainee to awakened. Min-soo wiped her hands on a cloth and looked at the panel over my shoulder. That's the method, she said, working. Now imagine what it does when we're not buying scraps. The system noticed the rank up before I did. The panel shifted, and the line I'd memorized on that first night redrew itself. The daily quota, the cap on how much I could print, the leash the system kept on the printer. It had unlocked. Awakened could print more than trainee. And then, like clockwork, the heat meter moved, 2 to 3. Because the truth of the printer was always the same. Every step up made me stronger, and every step up made me louder. Min-soo watched the number climb with an expression I couldn't read. It's not a meter, she said quietly. It's a countdown. To what? I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. To the moment the city decides you're worth hunting. There's no reset on that, Min-soo. There's only outrunning it. So we'd better climb faster than they can read the signals. The next day, at the academy, Jin-woo found me. He'd been waiting, I could tell. The way he stood, the way his friends fanned out behind him. The broke loser looks different, he announced to no one in particular. New clothes, new posture, almost like he thinks he belongs here now. What do you want, Jin-woo? I asked, and I could hear the difference in my own voice. It didn't waver anymore. He heard it too, and it made his smile go tight. I want to prove what everyone already knows, he said, that under the new clothes, you're still a score of 2. So let's settle it, he said, and the crowd leaned in. A duel. My champion against you at the awakening ceremony. You talk like you've climbed, so prove it. Unless, he spread his hands, the fake smile widening, you'd rather keep running, the way you always have. The whole courtyard went quiet, waiting. I told Min-soo about the duel that night, and she didn't look up from her mixing. He's not testing your strength, she said. He's testing whether you'll bleed in public. A duel at the awakening ceremony isn't a fight. It's a stage, and he wants you small on it, in front of everyone. Then I don't fight, I said. She set her tools down and looked at me, and I saw the alchemist in her eyes, the part that had survived the ruin of her sect by being colder and smarter than everyone around her. No, she said, you fight, but you don't fight like a score of 2. You fight like a man who's already won. She bet on me then, and I remember it clearly because it wasn't trust, it was recognition. I'm not betting on your strength, Min-soo, she said. I'm betting on the printer, on the one thing in this city that can turn a discarded nobody into something they can't step over. Don't waste it. So I trained. Not the way I'd trained as a kid, desperate and going nowhere, but the way Min-soo taught me, with a plan, with a dose for every step, with the money spent exactly where it would buy the most strength. The pills could raise my power, but only I could earn the skill to use it. Night after night, I pushed against the gap between what the system gave me and what my body could actually do. Money can buy strength, but it can't buy the hours, the repetitions, the forms, the pain of a muscle learning a new shape. That part was mine, and for the first time, I was glad it was. Min-soo watched from the corner, mixing the next dose, and once, when I finished a form without fumbling it, she gave a single nod. It was the most approval I'd ever gotten from anyone in my life, and it cost her nothing, and I'd have paid her 15% forever for just that. Across the city, in the central bank, a woman was assigned a case that would change everything, though neither of us knew it yet. She was young for the division, sharp, and the file they handed her was thin, a flagged anomaly, a district, a pattern of clean bills with no history. She opened it and read every page twice, the way you do when something doesn't sit right. Then she wrote a single word across the top in careful block letters, a name for the thing she was hunting. The Ghost Printer. It was the first time anyone had put a name to me. Her name was Shin Seo-yeon, and she was the best the bank had, which meant the anomaly had finally risen high enough to matter. She didn't know my name, or my face, or the alchemist in a rented room mixing doses for a man with a score that was no longer 2. But she'd know. Give her time. The day of the ceremony came, and the ring was already marked out when I arrived. Jin-woo was there early, holding court, his champion warming up behind him, a big man, all muscle and paid-for confidence. The crowd filled in, and I felt the weight of it, the same weight that had made me keep my head down for 21 years. But something was different now. The panel in the corner of my eye held steady, and the number on it was mine. I'd bought that number and earned the hours behind it, and for the first time, when I looked at the ring, I didn't see a stage built to make me small. I saw the first bill of the rest of my life come due. Awakened, I said under my breath, testing the word. Not a score of 2, not the broke loser. Awakened. Jin-woo caught my eye across the ring and smirked like he already knew how this ended. He didn't. The Ghost Printer was about to fight his first real fight, and somewhere in the bank, a woman was already writing his name. The night before the duel, Yoon-seo put a manual on the table between us, a real one, not a black market copy. One technique, she said. Learn it cold. You don't need a dozen forms. You need one move you can land before his reach finds you. It cost more than all the pills so far, and it was worth it. I stayed up until dawn with the manual, and the hours were the part the money couldn't buy. The system could lift my power, but my body had to learn the shape of the strike, the weight shift, the angle, the breath. I did the form until my arms burned and the words blurred, and I kept going. By morning, I could do it in my sleep. I looked at the panel, at the number that used to be 2, and I made myself a promise I'd never made before. When I stepped into that ring, I wouldn't fight like a man who was afraid of being seen. I'd fight like a man who was done hiding. The ceremony was everything Jin-woo wanted it to be. A crowd, a stage, and the whole academy watching. His champion stood in the ring, a big man, all muscle and paid-for confidence, rolling his shoulders while the students buzzed. They'd come to see the broke loser bleed in public. I walked to the ring and the murmur followed me. The same sound that had followed me my whole life. But it didn't land the same way anymore. I stepped over the line and faced the champion, and for the first time I saw him clearly. Not as the wall I'd spent 21 years walking around, but as a man with a reach and a rhythm and a weakness I'd trained all night to find. Jin-woo stood at the edge, arms crossed, smirking. Try not to embarrass yourself, he called, loud enough for everyone. I didn't answer. The referee's hand went up, and I let the noise fall away until there was nothing in the world but the champion across from me and the one move I'd learned cold. He came in swinging, all power and no patience, and I led him. I'd seen 100 men like him in the guild yards, big men who'd never had to be clever. I slipped the first blow, felt the wind of it, and for the first time in my life, my body did what I asked it to do instead of what I feared it would. The counter move landed clean, the one form from the manual, driven by 137 points of power I'd bought and a night of repetition I'd earned. The champion's eyes went wide, not at the pain, but at the surprise. The broke loser, the score of 2, had just hit him like a man who'd been training for exactly this. It was over fast after that. He came again, angrier, and I was already inside his reach. And when he went down, the crowd went silent in a way I'd never heard a crowd go silent before. I stood over him, breathing hard, and heard Jin-woo's smirk die somewhere behind me. I won. The words felt wrong even in my own head, because I'd never once said them about anything. But the referee raised my arm and the crowd erupted, and somewhere in it, a few voices that had laughed at me for years were suddenly terribly quiet. And yet, standing there with the noise washing over me, I felt it, the hollowness at the center of the win. The power had come from the pills, and the pills had come from the printer, and the printer had come from a light in the dark I didn't fully understand. It was my victory, but it was borrowed strength, and some part of me knew it. Jinwoo's face was the thing I'll remember. Not anger at first, confusion, like he was doing arithmetic that wouldn't come out right. How did the broke loser, the score of 2, put his champion down in front of everyone? It didn't make him afraid. It made him start asking the one question I couldn't afford to have anyone ask. The question started before I'd left the courtyard. Where did a broke kid get that kind of power, that kind of technique? Jinwoo's people were already making calls, and I knew what they'd find, or rather, what they'd start digging for, the money. It always came back to the money. That was the so what the system had been warning me about. Winning didn't end anything. It made me visible, and visibility was the one thing a counterfeiter could never afford. Every person who saw me win was now a person who might wonder how I'd done it, and the Cha family had the resources to keep wondering. The heat meter ticked as I walked, 3 to 4, and I felt it like a hand on the back of my neck. The win had been noticed, not just by the crowd, but by the city's ledger keepers, by the quiet men who read anomalies for a living. I'd traded a score of 2 for a target on my back, and I'd done it in public. Yujin was waiting for me when I got home, and the look on her face stopped me in the doorway. She'd heard about the duel, everyone had, and she'd put it together in the way only someone who knows you can. You're doing something illegal, she said, not a question, and I want to know what it is. I'm fine, I said, and she laughed, and it wasn't a happy laugh. You're fine like a man walking into traffic with his eyes shut is fine. I watched you almost die of nothing for years, Min-soo. I know what desperation looks like on you. And this, she gestured at me, at the new clothes, at everything. This is worse. She was right, of course. Yujin was almost always right about me. I stood there wanting to tell her everything and knowing I couldn't. Not yet. Not when telling her meant making her complicit in a crime that could hang us both. I won, I said instead, and it sounded hollow even to me. I don't care if you're rich, she said, and her voice cracked a little. I didn't care what you're into. I care that you don't disappear into it and come out someone I don't recognize. She looked at me, and I saw the years in her eyes, all the time she'd stayed when everyone else had gone. Just promise me one thing, she said. Promise you'll tell me everything when you're ready. Don't make me find out from the wrong people. It was such a small thing to ask, and it cost me more than any amount of money, because I knew I'd have to keep that promise, and keeping it meant trusting her with the truth someday. I promise, I said, and I meant it. She didn't ask for a cut or a favor or a piece of what I had. She asked me not to lose myself. It was the first time anyone had asked me for that, and it hit harder than the champion's swing ever could. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment she stopped being just my friend. The next night, Min-soo set down her tools and looked at me across the table. The Cha family is digging, she said. They'll find the broker, then the trail, then you. Which means we stop pretending this is a transaction and start acting like what it is. She held out her hand. I'm in, she said. Not for 15%, for the whole thing. You and me, the printer and the method, until one of us is too strong to be touched. I stared at her hand for a long moment. This was the difference between a supplier and an ally, and I could feel it. The point where trusting someone stopped being a risk and became a weapon. I took her hand, and the panel in the corner of my eye shifted. The allies counter, which had read 0 since the night the printer appeared, ticked to 1. Min-soo saw it and smiled, small and fierce. Good, she said. Now we're a problem with a plan. Jinwoo didn't take the loss quietly. Within days, the whispers started. The broke loser must have cheated, must have bought his way in, must have done something dirty to climb so fast. It was almost funny because it was true, and it was terrifying because the truth was the last thing I could let them find. His people went from asking to acting. A favor called in here, a door closed there. The Academy's tolerance for me, thin to begin with, evaporated. Where the crowd had cheered a week ago, they now watched me like I was a man with a secret, because I was. Sabotage, I learned, doesn't have to be violent. It just has to make you bleed slowly. That night, I understood the counterfeit trap in its final form. The more I won, the more they'd investigate. And the more they investigated, the closer they'd get to the one thing I couldn't explain. Winning and hiding were the same war now, and I couldn't win both, not the way I'd been fighting. At the central bank, the anomaly report had grown. The blip from weeks ago was now a pattern, a district, a face, a name attached to a flow of new bills that shouldn't exist. A clerk's hands hovered over the keyboard, and then, carefully, they typed it. Min-soo. I didn't know it yet, sitting in my room with the panel steady in the corner of my eye. But somewhere in the city, my name had stopped being a score of 2 and started being a case file. The bank's anomaly log had found its ghost, and the ghost had a face now. The heat meter held at 4, patient, and I felt the shape of what was coming, the way you feel the first cold wind before a storm. I'd won the duel, gained an ally, and lost my invisibility in a single week. The city had turned its head. From here on, everything was going to be faster, louder, and much harder to survive. There's a level below the broker's shop, below the alleys, where the goods are better and the eyes never stop moving. Min-soo led me down into it like she'd been born there, and maybe she had. The ruined sect had taught her the shape of every market in the city, including the ones that didn't officially exist. Down there, the pills were pure and the manuals were real, and the prices were enough to make my stomach drop. But I had a printer, and the printer had no opinion about what I spent. I bought better resources than I'd ever touched, and I watched my power climb past 400 and keep going. By the time we surfaced, I'd crossed a line I couldn't have imagined a month ago. 1,000 and change, practitioner rank. The broke loser with a score of 2 was now officially someone the Academy would have to pretend to respect. And that, I was learning, was its own kind of danger. The broker noticed, of course. He'd been selling me scraps for weeks, and now I was back with more money than ever and a hunger for the good stuff. He counted my bills slower each time, and I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. Where is it coming from, and how much of it can be mine? You're spending a lot, he said, not quite asking. A lot of new bills, too, clean ones. He let the words sit there, and I heard the shape of what he was really saying. I know something's wrong with your money, and my silence has a price. It's a gift, I said, flat, from a very generous family. He didn't believe me, and I didn't need him to. What I needed was for him to keep taking the money without asking questions, and I could see him deciding that my cash was worth more than his curiosity, for now. But a broker who prices his silence once will price it again, and higher, every time he sees how deep your pockets go. The heat meter moved twice that week, 4 to 6, and I felt every point of it. The system didn't judge, it just counted, and the count was climbing faster now. Every deep market deal, every rich purchase, every broker who now knew my face, they were all threads in a rope I kept tying tighter around myself. Min-soo saw me staring at the number and said the thing I'd been avoiding. The broker is the weak link. He doesn't need to know what you're doing to ruin you. He just needs to get scared or greedy and talk to the wrong person. She wasn't warning me. She was planning around it. That was the difference between us, I think. I kept hoping the danger would stay a number on a screen, and she kept treating it like what it was, a person, somewhere, with a mouth. We need a cleaner way to move the money, she said, before the market decides you're worth more sold out than kept. Jinwoo's people found me that week. I felt them before I saw them. A man at the edge of the crowd, always the same jacket, always turning away when I looked. The rich heir had finally done the smart thing and hired people to follow the broke loser's money instead of just mocking it. I ducked and doubled back and lost him in the alleys, but the damage was the knowing of it. Jinwoo wasn't guessing anymore. He was investigating, the way his family investigated anything that threatened them, quietly and with money and without ever once needing to be right before they acted. When I told Min-soo, she went very still. If they follow you to the printer's trail, she said, we're done. Not hurt, done. I knew she was right. A man can outrun a follower. He can't outrun a family with accountants, unless he stops looking like a man with something to hide. The black market will sell you out the moment it's profitable, Min-soo said, and she said it without heat, like it was a property of the market rather than a crime. They don't hate you. They don't even want to hurt you. They want to not be the one holding the bag when the bank comes looking. That's all. She was teaching me the thing her ruined sect had taught her. Institutions don't betray you out of malice. They betray you out of arithmetic. The broker would keep my secret exactly as long as the secret was worth less than the price of selling it. The moment the bank offered a reward or Jinwoo offered protection, I was inventory. So what do we do? I asked. She stopped pacing and looked at me. We make sure that by the time they decide to sell, they don't have anything left to sell. A trail that goes nowhere, a buyer who isn't you, money that looks like it came from somewhere real. That's the only way a ghost stays a ghost. It was Yujin who found the paper trail, because of course it was. She worked in the back room of a shop near the market, and she saw everything. Who came and went, who paid in clean bills, who asked for goods a broke kid had no business buying. She didn't say anything. She just started covering for me. I found out when a neighbor mentioned, offhand, that Yujin had told the market manager I was doing errands for a family up the hill. A lie she'd invented to explain my money, told so smoothly I almost believed it myself. She'd been lying for me, and it was eating at her, and she'd never once asked me to stop. When I confronted her, she wouldn't meet my eyes. I told myself I'd hate it, she said quietly, covering for whatever you're doing. But it's you, Min-soo. It's always been you. So I lie a little, and I hate it a little, and I do it anyway. It was the most Yujin thing anyone had ever done for me. At the bank, the investigator's file was thickening. The single anomaly had become a scatter of them. New bills here, a suspicious purchase there, all of it clustering around one district, one market, one small orbit of faces. She'd pinned a map to her wall, and the pins were starting to form a shape. Shin So-yeon stared at the map the way you stare at a half-finished sentence. The pattern was there, just out of reach, a flow of clean money with no source, moving like a river that started nowhere. She didn't have the name yet, but she had the shape of it, and the shape was getting smaller every day. It's one person, she said to the empty room, testing the idea. One source, one printer. The word hung there, and I felt it in my room across the city, the way you feel a searchlight sweep past your window. The bank didn't know who I was, but it knew I was one, and it was narrowing. That night, I understood something Min-soo had been trying to tell me for days. I couldn't outspend suspicion. There was no amount of money that would make a pattern of clean bills look natural, but I could outthink it. I could make the money look like it came from somewhere instead of nowhere. Every ghost needs a story, Min-soo said, spreading papers across the table. A reason the money exists, an explanation a clerk can file and forget. If the trail ends at a legitimate front, a shop, a business, a name that pays taxes, then the investigation ends there too. That's how you stop being a question and start being an answer. So we built one. Not a big lie. Big lies get investigated. A small, boring lie, the kind nobody looks at twice. A front to explain the cash. A paper trail that led to a real business with a real door and a real reason to move money. It was the first clean layer, and I could feel it taking shape like armor. The front was a shop, because a shop is the most invisible thing in the city. People walk past shops every day and never once wonder where the money comes from. We took a lease on a small storefront, stocked it with ordinary goods, and wired the printer's output through its books like blood through a clean vein. It was tedious and slow, and it worked. The new bills stopped looking new. They came out of the front's till like they'd been there all along. The trail that had pointed at a broke kid in a rented room now pointed at a business with a ledger and a door. And for the first time in weeks, the heat meter stopped climbing so fast. I stood outside the shop at closing and felt something I hadn't felt since the printer appeared. The beginning of safety. Not real safety, just the outline of it. A layer between me and the people who were looking. It's not armor, Min-soo said, reading my face. It's a first coat, but it's a start. High above the city, in a boardroom where the light never changed, an old man read the anomaly report. Chairman Oh Sung-woo, head of the central bank, the man who owned the money supply the way other men owned buildings. He'd read 1,000 reports like it. Most of them he forgot by lunch. This one he read twice. A pattern of clean bills with no source, moving through one district, wearing a front so tidy it was almost too tidy. He set the report down and looked at the man who'd brought it, and the room went cold in the way rooms do when a chairman stops being bored. "A money printer," he said, and the word landed like a stone in still water. "In my city." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Find them." 2 words, and the whole machinery of the state turned, quietly and all at once, toward the ghost it had only just learned to name. I felt it in my room that night, though I didn't know why. The searchlight had found its direction. The bank handed the ghost printer case to a woman named Min-soo, and I know now that was the moment everything changed, though I didn't know it then. She was the best they had, the one they brought in when a pattern wouldn't die on its own, and she did not believe in luck. She read the file twice, then a third time, the way you read something that doesn't sit right. A district, a flow of clean bills, a front so tidy it was almost insulting. She didn't see a crime yet. She saw a shape, one source, one hand behind the money, and that hand, she decided, was clever. Clever was the part that interested her. A stupid counterfeiter gets caught in a week. A clever one is a puzzle, and Min-soo had spent her whole career climbing toward exactly this kind of puzzle. She closed the file and set it to the empty room, like a promise. "I'll find you." She started where the money started, or as close as anyone could get. The black market. Not in a raid, she was too smart for that. She went in quiet, in plain clothes, asking the kind of questions that sound like small talk until you realize you've answered them. I heard about it from Min-soo, who heard about it from the market's nervous edges. A woman, sharp, asking about clean bills and new buyers. The broker, she said, had gone pale when he heard. "She's bank," Min-soo said. "Not the clumsy kind, the kind that doesn't leave until she has a name." That was the first time I understood the hunter and the hunted had stopped being abstract. Somewhere in my city, a woman I'd never met was walking the same alleys I walked, asking the same people I paid, and every step she took was a step in my direction. The game had a face now. I just hadn't seen it yet. The heat meter jumped, 6 to 8, and this time I felt it in my chest. 2 points in a single week, the fastest climb since the beginning. The system was telling me what Min-soo already had. The net was tightening, and the thing doing the tightening was good. The broker was the first to crack, because the broker was the weakest point, and he knew it. He stopped meeting my eyes. He counted my money faster, and twice I caught him about to say something and thinking better of it. A scared broker, I was learning, was more dangerous than a greedy one. "He's going to talk," Min-soo said flatly. "Not today, not tomorrow, but she'll offer him a way out, and he'll take it, because that's what brokers do when the bank comes asking." She looked at me. "We have to be gone from his book by then. Every trace, every bill, every name." I met her without knowing who she was. That's the cruel part. A woman sat down across from me in a tea house near the front, sharp-eyed and composed, sleek dark hair, a tailored suit, and she asked for a recommendation like it was the only reason she was there. We talked for 10 minutes, and I never once realized I was being read. She asked clever questions about the neighborhood, the market, the new shop that had opened so quietly. I answered them the way you answer a stranger being polite, and every answer, I'd learn later, was a thread she was tying to my name. It was only after she left, when I noticed she'd paid with a card and left no name and taken nothing with her, that something prickled at the back of my neck. I'd been around people my whole life, and I could always tell when someone wanted something. She hadn't wanted anything. That was the warning. Yoo-jin came to me that night, and I saw it in her face before she spoke. The fear she'd been carrying for weeks, finally too heavy to hold. "I can't keep guessing," she said. "I can't keep lying for something I don't understand. If I'm going to protect you, Min-soo, I have to know what I'm protecting." So I told her everything. The printer, the counterfeit, the heat, the front, the woman from the bank who'd asked me clever questions in a tea house. I watched her take it all in, piece by piece, and I braced myself for the one thing I was most afraid of, that she'd finally, sensibly, walk away. She didn't. She sat down on the edge of the mattress, the same way she had the night the printer first appeared, and she was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at me, and her voice didn't waver. "Okay," she said, "then we do it together. No more hiding the parts I can't see." The panel in the corner of my eye flickered, and I watched the allies counter tick from 1 to 2. It had never meant much to me before, a number like all the others. But this time I understood it. Yujin hadn't just promised to stay, she'd chosen to fight, and the system had counted it. "I'm not a fighter," she said, almost apologetic, like it was a shortcoming. "I can't mix a dose or land a strike, but I can run the front, and I can read people, and I can be the one who watches the door while you two climb. Someone has to." She said it like it was nothing. It wasn't. That was Yujin's way. She never saw her own value, only the work. But I saw it then, clearly, for the first time. She was the reason I hadn't already been caught. The lies she told, the trail she covered, the eyes she kept on the street. She'd been my ally since before the word existed. Now it was official. With Yujin running the front and Min-soo running the method, the machine finally worked the way it was meant to. The money flowed clean through the shop's books, the doses got purer, and my power climbed past 3,000. 3,000 and change, a number I'd have called a fairy tale a month ago. The three of us fell into a rhythm that felt almost like a life. Min-soo mixed by day, I trained by night, and Yujin kept the world outside convinced we were nothing more than a small shop and a boy who'd finally caught a break. The discarded, the three of us, building something out of nothing. But I could feel the edges of it, even in the good days. The climb had a shadow now. For every point of power I gained, the woman from the bank was a step closer, and the broker was a minute nearer to talking, and the heat meter was a little higher. We were winning and losing at the same time, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of road. Then the thing I'd never expected happened. Jinwoo's sabotage turned on him. He'd been digging into my money, trying to find the dirt, and in the digging he'd exposed the wrong ledger, his own family's. A slush fund, a bribe, a trail of the Cha family's dirty money, laid bare by the same investigation he'd aimed at me. I watched it happen from a distance, and it taught me something about the world Jinwoo and I actually lived in. He'd spent his life believing his money was clean because it was legal, and mine was dirty because it wasn't. But when the bank looked closely, the difference between his family and me was thinner than he'd ever imagined. He didn't learn anything from it, of course. Men like Jinwoo don't. He just got angrier and more dangerous, because now he had something to prove and nothing left to lose. But for one moment, watching his perfect world crack, I let myself feel something I hadn't in a long time. I let myself think, maybe the score was never the measure. It was Min-soo who said it, in her flat, unhurried way. "You've been worried about the wrong person." She didn't look up from her mixing. "Jinwoo is a rich boy with a grudge. He'll make noise, but the woman from the bank, she's the one who'll end us, not the heir, the investigator." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. Jinwoo hated me, but hate is loud and sloppy and leaves a trail of its own. Seo-yeon didn't hate me. She didn't even know me. She was just doing her job, patiently and well, and that was far more dangerous than any grudge. You can outlast an enemy. You can't outlast a professional. "So I deal with her," I said, and Min-soo finally looked up. "No," she said, "you don't deal with her. You stay ahead of her. That's the only winning move against someone like that. Never let her catch up." It sounded simple. It wasn't, because she was already catching up. Across the city, Shin Seo-yeon found the thing I couldn't fake. It was late, and her office was the only light on the floor, and she had a bill under a lamp, a magnifier in her hand, studying it the way a jeweler studies a flaw. The ink, the serias, the paper, she'd checked them all 100 times. And there it was, the one thing no printer can get perfectly right, because it isn't printed. It's pressed, deep in the fiber, in a way that only the real mint knows. She set the bill down and let out a breath she'd been holding for weeks. The ghost had a fingerprint now, and the fingerprint was the source itself. "Got you," she said, so quietly it was almost kind. She didn't have my name yet, not for certain, but she had the flaw, and the flaw was a thread that led straight back through every bill I'd ever printed, to the light in the dark that had started it all. The hunt had a direction now, and the direction was me. The broker had been in the bank's custody for 6 hours before I heard they'd taken him. Shin So-yeon, the counterfeiting division's best, had put him in a room with one chair and a folder she never opened. "The ghost printer," she said, and he flinched before she'd even finished the sentence. She didn't need to raise her voice. She just let the folder sit there like a thing that was already true. Heat ticked to 9 while I read about it. The The system's way of telling me the net had tightened before I'd felt the rope. Every bill I'd ever pushed through that broker carried a fingerprint, and she was reading them one by one. He wasn't brave. Brokers never are. By nightfall, he'd agreed to talk, and the black market I'd built my climb on was about to turn into a witness list. I'd always known the broker was the weak link. Min-soo had told me a dozen times, the black market will sell you out the moment it's profitable. But knowing a thing and watching it happen from a rooftop across the street are different. He walked out with 2 suits on either side, and I understood I'd just lost the only door I knew how to open. I burned the ledger that night. Every name, every amount, every route the broker and I had used for weeks, curling into ash over a metal bin. It had to go, because if Seo-yeon got one name out of him, the rest would follow like a fuse. The other traders watched me do it, and none of them offered to help. Word had already spread. The kid with the endless cash had just become radioactive. The black market turned on me the way water turns cold. Not all at once, but by morning I couldn't buy a single pill at any stall that had ever taken my money. No stock, they said, without meeting my eyes. Come back next month. The brokers were spooked, and a spooked market doesn't ask where your cash comes from. It just closes its doors and points at you when the bank comes asking. That was the first time the printer couldn't spend its way out of a problem. I had more power than I'd ever dreamed of, and cash I could print by the hour, and nowhere clean to put it. The one thing my whole climb was built on, the trick of turning bills into strength, had just been taken off the table by a woman with a folder. I sat in my room with fresh cash stacked on the table and understood, maybe for the first time, what the counterfeit trap really meant. The money was perfect, the ink, the serials, the watermark, and it was worthless if there was no one who'd take it without naming me. A fortune that can't move isn't a fortune. It's evidence with extra steps. The system's quota kept ticking up with my rank, patient and indifferent, and I kept printing because stopping felt like admitting she'd already won. But printing without spending only made the pile taller, and a taller pile only made me brighter to the people watching the city's cash flows. Heat doesn't care if the money sits in my room or buys a manual. It only knows the bills exist. I'd spent my whole life broke and dreaming of exactly this, money I couldn't finish. Now that I had it, the dream had a new shape. A man alone in a room, counting bills nobody would take, while a hunter a city away read his trail backward like a map. The joke wasn't lost on me. It just wasn't funny anymore. Min-soo didn't panic the way I did. She pulled on her lab coat and took me across the river to the alchemy quarter, to a shop that smelled of dried root and old stone, and to a man named Go Myung-hwan. He'd been a supply runner for her family's sect before the Cha conglomerate buried it, back when her name still opened doors instead of closing them. "Your father's daughter," he said when he saw her, and for a second neither of them moved. Myung-hwan was old and careful, the kind who'd survived by never once being careless, and he looked at her the way you look at a ghost. Then he looked at me, at my 2 new clothes and my 2 clean hands, and said the only thing that mattered, "Does the money smell?" It was the first time I'd heard a supplier ask the question that actually mattered. Not, "Where did you get it?" but, "Will it bring them here?" Min-soo answered for me, because she'd learned the truth of the money long ago and stayed anyway. "It smells like every other bill in this city," she said. "The only difference is there's no one above it waiting to collect." Myung-hwan studied me a long moment. Then he nodded once. What Min-soo didn't tell me that night was what the visit cost her. Myung-hwan hadn't agreed because my money was good. He'd agreed because the name on Min-soo's tongue was one he still owed. She'd spent a decade rebuilding a life her family's ruin had left in pieces, and she'd just spent the last of its credit to keep me supplied. "My father's name is all I have left of him," she said when I finally pressed her, her hand still steady over the burners. "Every time I use it, I use a little more of what's mine." She didn't look at me. She didn't want me to see that it mattered. Min-soo risks her safety the way other people breathe, but this was different. This was her ruin, spent in my service, and she'd done it without asking. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to, but we both knew I had no other door, and Min-soo had never once done a thing she didn't mean. So I said the only true thing instead. "I'll make it worth the name." She glanced up then, through her glasses, and something in her tired face almost smiled. Then stop getting caught, she said, and climb.
Young-hwan's first shipment was cleaner than anything the black market ever touched. Old sect herbs and spirit stones that had moved through the same quiet roots for 30 years, below the bank's notice and above its suspicion. Yoon-seo worked them into a brew she'd been perfecting for weeks, and I drank it in a rented training cell with the city asleep outside. The breakthrough came like a wall coming down. Power 3581 to 9644, more than I'd ever held, and the rank that had been locked at practitioner for what felt like forever rolled over to adept. The system's panel flared mint green, and I felt the change settle into my bones the way cold settles into water. I wasn't weak anymore. I wasn't even pretending. The quota jumped with the rank, and so did the heat, 9 to 10, because every pill and stone that made me stronger was one more bill leading back to my door. But the so what was already moving faster than the cost. A man who's adept can defend what a practitioner only hoped to keep. Seo-yeon was still reading the old trail, and I was already on a new one. Cha Jin-woo heard about my rank up before I'd finished my first real meal in days, and it broke something in him that had been holding since the duel. The broke loser with the score of 2 was now adept, and adept was a number that showed up on the Cha family's own ledgers. He couldn't buy that back, so he did what the desperate do. He found someone who wanted me hurt worse than he did. The bank had been circling him for weeks, and Jin-woo, for the first time in his life, opened the door himself. A counterfeiting task force needed a face to put to the ghost printer, and he had one to sell. A nobody from the slums whose power had no honest explanation. Heat ticked to 11 before the meeting even ended, because a rich man's signature is a louder trail than any bill I've printed. I didn't know about the deal yet. I only knew the meter had jumped and that something behind me had gotten sharper. But I could feel the shape of it, the way you feel a storm before it breaks. Jin-woo wasn't sneering from a distance anymore. He was aiming, and a desperate heir with the bank's ear is a different animal than a rich kid with a grudge. Across the city, Shin Seo-yeon stood in front of her evidence wall and understood, with the particular clarity of someone very good at her job, that she'd been outrun. The broker had given her everything he knew, every stall, every drop, every face, and all of it was ash now. The roots were dead, the names were gone. The ghost printer had cut the whole limb off before she could grab it. She didn't curse. I don't think So-yeon has ever wasted a breath on a thing she couldn't use. She just repinned the map and looked at the empty spaces instead of the marked ones, the way the best hunters do. I can picture her face in that moment, sharp and unreadable, her sleek hair pulled back, calculating that the man she was hunting had just learned her favorite trick. I'd thought the investigator was the threat. That was my mistake. Seo-yeon was a step behind and she knew it, which meant she'd stop chasing and start waiting. The worst kind of hunter isn't the one who's close. It's the one who's patient enough to let you think you're free, then reads the one thing you couldn't burn. That night, I stood on a rooftop and looked down at the city that had spent my whole life telling me I was nothing, and I finally understood the game I was actually in. It wasn't money, and it wasn't even power. It was a race. Heat only ever climbs, and the people hunting me only ever get better, and the only thing that could ever make me safe was climbing faster than they could close in. The math was brutal and simple. Every print, every pill, every rank up made me stronger and brighter at the same time. So I couldn't afford to slow down, and I couldn't afford to be stupid. If I hit heat 100 before I was untouchable, the city's whole financial machinery would land on me at once, and no adept survives that. But if I climbed first, high enough, fast enough, the same people who owned the money would have to treat me like a fact instead of a fugitive. Climb fast enough to be untouchable, I said to the empty rooftop, testing the words. The system's panel hung in the corner of my eye, quiet and green, as if it had known the answer all along. I'd spent 21 years being told I couldn't. Now I had a printer and a deadline, and for the first time, the two of them pointed the same direction. In a boardroom I'd never be allowed to stand in, the bank made Cha Jin-woo an offer he'd been waiting his whole spoiled life to hear. They didn't want his money, and they didn't want his family's favors. They wanted the ghost printer, and in exchange, every dirty ledger the Cha conglomerate had ever hidden would simply stop existing. I could picture it perfectly, the polished table, the single sheet of paper, the heir's hand reaching for it before the man across from him finished speaking. Expose the printer,
and the Cha family's crimes disappear. It was the oldest deal in the world, dressed up in marble. Hand over the man you hate, and we'll both forget what you are.
Find him, the man said, and it all goes away.
Jinwoo signed. I didn't know it yet, standing on my rooftop with the city's lights spread out like a promise, but the hunt had just changed hands. The bank wasn't sending one investigator anymore. It had just bought an army with a name attached to it. Mine.
Chairman Oh Seung-woo was the kind of man who never raised his voice, because the world had spent 50 years learning to lean in when he whispered. He stood at the window of the central bank's highest floor and looked down at the city the way a farmer looks at a field, like every flow, every ledger, every bill that moved through it was his to count. One investigator, he said, is how you catch a forger.
I am not interested in a forger. The task force behind him didn't move. They'd been pulled from half the bank's divisions: currency, enforcement, the men who'd spent their careers reading anomalies, and folded into a single unit with one job. The ghost printer had stopped being Seo-yeon's case and become the bank's war. Heat ticked to 12 before the meeting was done.
I felt it from across the city, that cold little climb in the corner of my eye,
and I understood what it meant. They weren't hunting me with one sharp woman anymore. They'd built a machine for it, and a machine doesn't get tired and doesn't make mistakes. It just grinds. The chairman had decided I was worth the whole apparatus, and that was a different kind of attention than I'd ever been trained to dodge.
The first thing the task force did was the thing I hadn't been afraid of, because I hadn't thought it possible. They started watching the city's cash flows in real time, every deposit, every withdrawal, every shop till and street stall that moved more money than it should. Not hunting a specific bill, but building a picture of where the money was breathing. Heat ticked again, 12 to 14.
And this time I understood it was my spending itself they were reading. Myung-hwan's quiet routes were quiet, but a man who prints money is a man who spends money, and spending leaves a shadow even when it leaves no name. The bank didn't need to catch the bill. It needed only to watch the shadows until one of them was mine.
Yoon-seo put it in terms I'd understand.
They've stopped looking for a needle. They're heating the whole haystack. I'd spent weeks learning to hide individual bills, and now the game had moved past that. They were watching the whole city breathe, and every breath I spent made me a little louder.
That was the so what of the whole thing,
and it landed on me like a door closing. I needed to climb faster than ever. Heat was climbing on its own now, and the only way out was to get too strong to touch. But spending was exactly what was making me bright. Every pill I bought, every stone I burned, was another wad of light on the bank's screens.
So I slowed down,
not because I wanted to, but because I had to. And it went against every instinct 21 years of poverty had carved into me. I sat in the lab with a day's quota worth of printed cash and didn't spend a single bill, watching the city's shadows instead of casting new ones. It was the hardest thing I'd done since the eviction notice. A rich man choosing to look poor, while the meter measuring my danger kept climbing anyway.
The worst part was the knowing.
I could feel the strength I was leaving on the table, the rank-ups I wasn't taking, and the hunters who didn't have to slow down because nothing about them was counterfeit. For the first time, the printer's real bottleneck wasn't the quota or the trail. It was the man holding the money, deciding whether to burn bright or live.
The two women who'd kept me alive showed up at the same time,
and for a second, the three of us just stood in the doorway like people who'd each thought they were the only one coming. Yoojin with a bag of food and that look she gets when she's already decided to fight someone for me. Yoon-seo with a folder of roots and the calm of a woman who's done this math before.
So this is her, Yoojin said, not unkindly,
and Yoon-seo's tired eyes flicked over Yoojin's practical coat and easy smile and found, I think, the same thing I'd always found, someone who'd stayed when the world said leave. They didn't like each other right away, but they liked each other enough to both be standing in my room, on opposite sides of the same fear, and that was more than I'd ever had.
I introduced them properly,
and the words felt strange in my mouth, because I'd kept my two lives in separate rooms for so long. The alchemist who turned my money into power, and the friend who'd kept me human while it happened. Neither of them asked to be there. They'd both just shown up because the hunt had stopped being my problem alone.
I'd pictured the two of them clashing,
the warm street friend and the cold genius. But they did something worse. They started talking to each other about me. The The way people talk about a sick relative who won't admit he's sick. He'll spend it all the moment we look away, Yoojin said, and Yoon-seo nodded without missing a beat. He already tried. It was the alliance I hadn't asked for, forming around me whether I wanted it or not. Yoojin brought the street. She could read a room and a risk better than any banker in the task force. Yoon-seo brought the method. She knew exactly where the money could still move without making a sound. Between them, they were rebuilding the operation I'd been so proud to run alone, and doing it better. I should have been annoyed. Instead, I just watched them and felt something I hadn't felt in years. The specific, unfamiliar weight of people who wouldn't let me fall, even when falling was my own doing. The mint system had given me money and power. These two gave me the thing money can't print, a reason not to burn it all on a shortcut. With the new roots and Yoojin watching my back, I spent 2 days doing nothing but climbing. Carefully, quietly, in a cell Myung-hwan had kept off every ledger. Yoon-seo's bruise had grown stronger as she'd grown freer, and the realm that had been a wall for weeks cracked open like ice in spring. Power 9644 to 24803. I didn't stop at Adep's floor anymore. I was standing on its ceiling. Not weak, I said out loud, and the words landed in the empty cell like a verdict. There was a time when a score of 2 meant I'd never stand where I was standing. Now the examiner's careless next felt like something that had hacked into a different man. The power was real, bought and trained and earned in equal parts, and for the first time I believed the race might actually be winnable. But the heat didn't sleep while I climbed. 14 to 15, a quiet tick that reminded me every realm has a price tag on the outside. The stronger I got, the more the city's watchers had reason to wonder who was moving all that value through the shadows. I was winning the race by running faster, and running faster was the one thing that made them chase harder. While I climbed, Seo-yeon followed a trail I'd spent a full day laying, and I can only imagine the look on her face when she kicked in the warehouse door and found it waiting. A room full of half-burned ledgers, a printer, a name that belonged to a dead man. Everything a task force dreams of finding, and all of it pointing at a ghost that didn't exist. It wasn't a trick, exactly. It was a mirror, and I'd aimed it carefully. Everything about the ghost printer she'd been taught to expect served up neat. The men behind her spread out to bag evidence, but Seo-yeon stood in the doorway and didn't move, and I think that was the moment she understood she wasn't chasing a counterfeiter who made mistakes. She was chasing someone who'd studied her. "It's too clean," she said, or something like it, and the cold truth of it must have turned over in her stomach. A real operation leaves mess. Mine left exactly what she was supposed to find and nothing more. The hunter had been handed her prey on a plate, and the only thing that told her, the only thing, was that a plate is never given for free. The heir, now running on the bank's authority like it was his own money, found his way to the one piece of my operation he could actually grab. They came to Myung-hwan's shop with a search warrant and a bag of threats, and the old man stood in the doorway and didn't step aside. "Everything in this shop is 30 years of legal," he said. "You'll meet a better reason than a rich boy's temper." They offered him money, then safety, then the one thing that almost worked, a clean name for a man whose sect had been buried by the same families he was now standing against. Go Myung-hwan looked at the papers, then at Jinwoo's flushed, furious face, and laughed. "I lost my sect to people like you once," he said. "I won't lose the rest of it to the same boy in a better suit." That was when he stopped being a supplier and became something else. The system marked it the way it marks everything, with a quiet tick, allies 2 to 3, and heat climbing to 16 behind it, because the raid had dragged my operation out of the shadows and into the bank's files. Myung-hwan had burned his last clean exit to stand with me, and the cartel would remember his door. Loyalty in this city is the most expensive thing there is, and he'd just spent his whole life's worth on a boy he barely knew. After the raid failed to break us, I finally learned the cartel's real power, and it wasn't what I'd been afraid of. They didn't need to catch me, and they didn't even need to prove I existed. They could freeze me out, mark every route, every supplier, every clean door in the city, and starve the operation without ever laying a hand on me. I watched it happen from the outside, the way you watch a slow tide. One route went dark, then another, as the bank's authority reached into places even the black market respected. The cartel didn't chase money. They controlled the places money could flow, and that was the difference. I could print $1 billion, and it wouldn't matter if there was nowhere left for $1 billion to land. They don't want to catch you, Min-soo said quietly. They want to make you irrelevant. And that was the coldest part of it. I'd built everything on being able to spend, and they were building a world where spending itself was the crime that got you found. The machine wasn't coming for me with guns. It was coming for the doors. Late that night, Shin Seo-yeon sat alone in the investigation room and did the thing that made her the most dangerous person in the city. She tore down the wall that said Syndicate and started again from nothing, because the evidence wouldn't fit a gang no matter how she bent it. Gangs are loud and messy and leave 100 hands. This was one hand, patient and precise. You're not a network, she said to the empty room, or something very like it, and I can feel her mind moving even now, sharp as a scalpel. The ghost printer wasn't a cartel or a cell or a conspiracy. It was a single person with a single set of fingerprints who'd outthought an entire bank and was, somewhere out there, still climbing. One man, and she was going to find him. I didn't know she'd reached that conclusion, couldn't know, but the heat at 16 told me something had shifted behind me. The task force was a machine, but a machine can't think its way into a person's mind. Seo-yeon could. She'd stopped hunting a gang and started hunting a man, and the distance between a hunter and a person is a lot smaller than the distance between a hunter and an idea. She was coming for me now. Not the printer, me. The freeze came all at once, the way the chairman did everything, quietly and then everywhere. By morning, the broker network was gone, the black market shuttered, and every route I'd spent weeks rebuilding had a bank seal on its door. They didn't arrest the traders, they just made it illegal to be one, and a man with nowhere to spend is a man with nothing. Heat jumped to 18 the moment the seals went up, because the freeze wasn't just a wall, it was a spotlight. The whole city's underground economy had just been told there was a reason the bank was burning it down, and every spooch trader in it was suddenly looking for someone to blame. The thing about freezing a market is you don't just stop the money, you stop the silence that hides it. Myung-hwan's quiet roots held a day longer than the rest, out of old loyalty and older habit. But even he stood in his shop at dusk and told me the truth. They're not sealing doors, boy. They're sealing the city. The cash I could print had no clean place left to go, and for the second time in a week, I was rich in the one currency that couldn't save me. That was the so what that almost broke me, and it wasn't the money. It was the climb. Without Yoon-seo's resources, my power stalled mid-rise the way a runner stalls against a wall. So close to the next realm I could taste it, and no way to buy the last step. The quota sat there glowing, mocking me. I could print a fortune I couldn't spend on the one thing that mattered. I'd learned to measure my life in the climb. Every rank a rung, every realm a door, and now the ladder had been pulled up while I was on it. The hunters didn't even need to find me. They just had to keep the resources from reaching my hands, and time would do the rest. Heat ticked to 19, as if to remind me that even standing still, I was getting brighter. A frozen printer is just a man with paper, I said to the empty room, and the words tasted like the old days, when being broke wasn't a trap I'd chosen, but a fact of my blood. Except now it was worse, because I knew exactly what I was capable of, and exactly what was being held out of reach. Poverty you've never escaped is one thing. Poverty they've engineered to hold you is another. Yoon-seo found the way through the way she always did, not by fighting the wall, but by remembering a door the wall builders had forgotten. Her family's sect had run supply lines for 3 generations before the Cha conglomerate buried it, and those routes had never truly died. They'd just gone dark, waiting, like everything else the rich had broken and left behind. They're dead on paper, she said, spreading the map with fingers that didn't tremble, which means the bank's seals never touched them. The lines ran through old shrines and forgotten fairy routes, and a dozen quiet hands who still owed her father's name. Resurrecting them would cost money, risk, and something she hadn't put a price on. But it was a path under the freeze, and it was the only one we had. I watched her work and felt the old ache of it. Every door she opened cost her a little more of the life she'd rebuilt, and she kept opening them anyway, without being asked, without a word of complaint. Somewhere under that curvy, steady, lab-coated calm was a woman who'd decided long ago that being discarded didn't mean being finished, and who decided, for reasons I still didn't fully understand, to spend that stubbornness on me.
"I need the whole truth," she said, and the burner flame stopped flickering as if the room itself was listening. It was the one thing she'd never asked for. Not a cut, not a favor, not a name. In all the weeks we'd worked together, she'd taken me on faith and half answers and the shape of the secret she'd guessed. Now she was asking for the rest.
I could have lied or told her a version, and she'd have known.
Min-soo reads a compound the way other people read a face, down to the last part per million. So I told her everything, in the low light, the words coming out slow and unguarded. The system, the printing, the heat that only ever climbed, and the race I was running against 100. All of it. The secret I hadn't even told myself in full.
She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she just nodded, like I'd confirmed something she'd already calculated. "Good," she said. "Now I know the real bottleneck." And that was Min-soo, always. Not afraid of the counterfeit money, but already working out how to spend it cleaner, faster, before the meter at the edge of my eye ran out of room. The front company was my cleanest lie, a shell I'd built in the early days to explain the cash, run by a quiet, meticulous man named Han Jae-won, who kept books so clean they squeaked. That was the day Shin So-yeon walked in with her sleek suit and her unreadable face and started asking questions a bookkeeper was never supposed to survive. Jae-won didn't flinch. I'd picked him because he could recite a ledger from memory and smile while doing it. And he sat across from So-yeon and answered every question the way a mirror answers a room, with exactly what was asked and nothing else. But So-yeon isn't fooled by clean books. She reads the spaces between the numbers, and the space between ours was narrowing to a hair. Heat ticked to 20 while she was still in the room, and I felt it like a finger on my spine. She didn't find it that day, not quite, but she left with something worse than evidence, the certainty that the front was a front, and that somewhere behind it, a real man was holding a real secret. The gap between hunter and prey had just become the width of a breath. The move that broke the freeze wasn't a print or a purchase. It was remembering what the cartel had forgotten, that they could seal the market, but not the blood that ran through it. Min-soo's resurrected lines came alive one by one, and the first shipment moved under their noses on a ferry route the bank's map said didn't exist. The freeze was a wall. We went under it. With real resources in my hands, again, the stalled climb broke like a dam. Power 24,803 to 512,904, and the rank that had been adept for an age rolled over to master with a flare that lit the whole shrine green. The breakthrough I'd been chasing through every frozen day finally landed, and it landed hard enough that I felt the city shift under me, as if the ladder I was climbing had just grown a new rung I could stand on. Heat jumped with it, 20 to 22, because a master's worth of power doesn't move through a city without leaving a shape in the shadows. But this time, the so what cut both ways. The cartel had frozen me to stop the climb, and I'd climbed anyway, under their wall and past their maps. They weren't hunting a counterfeiter anymore. They were hunting a man who'd just proven he couldn't be frozen. In the war room, the bank's best minds laid out the same conclusion from 3 different directions, and none of them liked it. The ghost printer hadn't folded under the freeze. He'd adapted, rerouted, and broken through to master in the middle of it, which meant the operation wasn't a criminal enterprise they could starve. It was a mind, moving faster than their machine. "We're not hunting a counterfeiter," one of them said, and the words hung in the air over Chairman O like smoke. "We're hunting a genius." Heat ticked to 23, and I felt it across the city as a kind of cold regard. The moment the hunt stopped being about my money and became about what I might become if they couldn't stop me. A counterfeiter is a nuisance. A genius is a threat. The chairman didn't raise his voice. He never did. But I imagine his knuckles going white against the table as he looked at the numbers, because a man who owns the money supply fears exactly 2 things: a rival with a faster printer and the public learning there is one. I'd just become both, and the war room knew it. Cha Jin-woo, who'd thrown in with the bank expecting to watch me burn, found the fire spreading the wrong direction. The task force he'd helped arm had started looking into everyone, including the family that had signed the deal, and the Cha conglomerate's own dirty money, the crimes the bank had promised to bury, were suddenly back on the table like an unpaid bill. He panicked the way the entitled panic, not quietly, but by demanding things be fixed, as if the universe owed him the outcome he'd already spent. He called in favors that had been promised and found them gone, because a rich heir is only valuable while he's useful, and the bank was beginning to wonder if the price of protecting Jinwoo was higher than the price of letting him burn. I almost pitied him, watching it from a distance through the news and the whispers. Almost. The boy who'd laughed at my score of 2 was now learning the lesson I'd learned in a slum alley. In a city that runs on money, the moment you stop being the money's favorite, the money has no memory of you at all. Then I learned what the cartel would do when a wall failed, and it turned my stomach. They'd burn the whole black market to the ground to starve me. Not seal it, but let it collapse, the way you'd poison a well to kill one man drinking from it. Every trader, every family, every quiet hand who'd ever touched my money, thrown to the wolves so the wolves would starve me out. They'll sacrifice thousands to get one, Min-soo said, and there was no surprise in her voice, only the flat recognition of someone who'd seen the rich do exactly this before. Her family's sect hadn't just been ruined, it had been collateral. The cartel didn't weigh people on a scale of worth, it weighed them on a scale of exposure, and a broke printer was worth more dead than a market's worth of nobodies was alive. That was the night the fight stopped being about me. I'd spent my whole life as one of those nobodies, the kind the rich spent without a second thought, and now the machine that had ground me down was reaching for a whole city of people who'd never asked to be in my path. I could run, or I could get too big to burn. The first was what they wanted. The second was the only thing that would save anyone. It happened by accident, the way the worst things do. A tea house neither of us should have been in, a shared table when the room filled, and suddenly I was sitting across from Min-soo, the woman who'd been hunting me for weeks, watching her stir her tea with a calm that made the whole room feel like a chessboard. She was every bit the picture the files painted. Curvy and sharp, sleek black hair, a tailored suit that fit like armor, and eyes that never stopped counting. I kept my face easy and my hands still, and told her nothing at all, the way a man holds his breath underwater. Neither of us knew, then, that the person across the table was the one each of us had been chasing through the dark. "You look like a man with somewhere to be," she said, and I laughed, a real careful laugh, because she had no idea how true it was, and neither did she know the same could be said of her. We parted with pleasantries and a handshake that lasted half a second too long, the hunter and the ghost, touching hands over cold tea, each of us a secret the other would kill or save for. The second meeting wasn't an accident, and I knew it the moment I saw her waiting at the cafe table like she'd chosen it on purpose. Min-soo had found me, or found the version of me I let the city see, the broke kid who'd climbed too fast for anyone to ignore. "Choi Min-soo," she said, and smiled. "I've been meaning to meet you." She was sharp in a way that had nothing to do with the tailored suit or the sleek black hair, though those were sharp too. Everything about her was a question dressed as small talk, where I'd trained, how a slum kid paid for a master's realm, who I owed. I answered the way a man walks a wire, true enough to stand on, light enough to leave no mark. Neither of us said the real thing once. We circled each other for an hour over coffee I could barely taste. Two people holding their hands so carefully you'd think the table was made of glass. I watched her count me the way I'd counted her, and I understood with a cold certainty that this woman wasn't going to stop. She'd been sent to find the ghost printer, and she just learned there was a face to put to the name. The meeting was a trap, and the worst part was that I'd walked into it anyway, because she'd made me curious, and because staying away would have been its own answer. Heat jumped the moment I left, 23 to 28, and I felt it like a door slamming somewhere behind me. The bank now had my face in a file, and my face had just sat across from it. That was the so what of the whole encounter, and it was worse than I'd feared. It wasn't that she knew, it was that the clock was now real in a way it hadn't been before. A meter is just numbers until the person reading it knows your face. So-yeon had stopped chasing a ghost and started investigating a man she could watch, follow, and eventually break. I walked home the long way, doubling back twice, and every shadow had her eyes in it now. The climb that had felt like a race I could win suddenly felt like a race with a finish line that kept moving. Because a woman like So-yeon doesn't just get closer, she makes you feel her getting closer, until the fear of it does half her work for her.
Yu-jin was waiting in my room when I got back, and the look on her face told me she already knew. Not the details, she's never needed the details, but the shape of it, the way the danger had stopped being something I told her about and become something that followed me home. I saw her, she said, the woman from the bank. She was at the cafe, and so were you. Min-soo, please. Her voice cracked on it, and I saw the fear underneath the anger. The street kid in her who'd watched too many people she loved get taken by men and women with badges and folders. Whatever you're doing, whatever this is, stop, before there's no stopping, before they take you and I have to watch it happen the way I watched everyone else. I'd seen Yu-jin scared before, 100 times, back when we were hungry and the landlords came. But I'd never seen her beg, and it undid something in my chest. She wasn't asking me to quit because she was afraid of the money. She was afraid of the thing the money had made me, the man who walked into a trap because he was too curious to stay away. Then she told me the truth she'd been holding, the one I'd been too busy climbing to ask for. I don't care if you're rich, Min-soo. I never have. I care if you're still you. She said it quietly, to her hands, and it landed like a thing she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten how heavy it was until she set it down. All those years, she went on, I stayed because you were the one person in that slum who'd give away his last coin and pretend he wasn't hungry. That's the Min-soo I came here for, not the one with a printer and a price on his head. Him. Her curvy shoulders were set, her open face hard with the effort of it, and for once, Yu-jin wasn't smiling. I didn't have an answer, because the question was the one I'd been dodging since the first bill. Money was changing me. I could feel it, the way you feel a tide turning, and the only person brave enough to say it out loud was sitting beside me, asking not for a cut or a promise, but for the one thing the printer couldn't fabricate, that I'd still be the man she stayed for when the machine was done with me. I didn't stop. I couldn't. The only answer to a hunter who knows your face is to get so far out of reach that the face doesn't matter. So I climbed harder than I'd ever climbed, night after night in the shrine, burning through Yoon-seo's strongest bruise and Myung-hwan's last clean roots. Power 51294 to 98215. Master's Peak, the edge of something bigger. The world started to notice the broke loser. Guilds that had once slammed their doors in my face were suddenly asking my name. The same examiners who'd stamped me too were rewriting their ledgers with a number that made them nervous. Heat ticked again, 28 to 31, because rising this fast in a city that watches the strong is its own kind of advertisement. Every rank I gained made me safer from the small men and more visible to the big ones. That was the cruel arithmetic of it. I was climbing out of reach of the heir's kind and directly into the sightline of the chairman's, and the only way through was to keep climbing until even the top of the mountain had to look up at me. So I climbed, and I let them watch, and I made peace with the light it cost. Seo-yeon did what I knew she'd do the moment she had a face to work with. She went back to the very beginning. The eviction notice, the score of 2, the broke kid who'd gone from nothing to master in a season, and started pinning it to her wall. The money trail, the timing, the sudden resources, every thread I'd thought I'd buried, she pulled back into the light. A man with no income, she said, or something like it, and no backer, and no explanation for where a master's realm came from. The pieces were all there in her hands now, and the picture they made was me. She didn't have proof, not yet, not the kind that holds up in a room of men who'd rather not believe it, but she had something the bank had been missing all along, a suspect with a face and a name and a reason to be angry. I could feel her getting there, the way you feel a storm front rolling in over a field. So-yeon wasn't guessing anymore. She was building, carefully, out of nothing but the spaces between my lies, and I'd given her the last piece myself by sitting across from her with a master's calm and a slum kid's history. The hunter had her man. Now she just needed to prove it. Cha Jin-woo, cornered and terrified, made the move I should have seen coming, the move of a man with nothing left to lose. He turned on my front company, the clean shell Han Jae-won had kept airtight, and ordered it burned, not to catch me, to punish me, to prove to the bank he was still useful, to claw back the safety his family's exposure had already cost him. The men he sent weren't bank enforcers this time. They were the heir's own,
the kind who'd do a thing for money and not ask whose door it was. They came to the office at night, and I saw the danger for what it was the moment word reached me. Not a threat to me, but to everyone standing near me. Jaewon, my roots, the quiet people who'd taken my cash and my risk. Jinwoo had stopped aiming at the printer and started aiming at everyone who loved him. It ticked to 34 as the operation went loud, and this time I didn't feel it as a number. I felt it as a fire I'd been warned about since the first bill. The moment the counterfeit fortune stopped being mine to spend and became a fuse burning toward the people I cared about. The trap wasn't for me anymore, it was for them. I got there before the men did, and I'd like to say I was calm, but I wasn't. I was a master with a printer's worth of power and a slum kid's memory of what men with money do to people they think are nobody. Yoojin was there, and Yoon-seo, and Jae-won behind a desk full of ledgers that could hang us all, and I stood between them and the door like a wall with a heartbeat. The fight, when it came, was short. I was past the point where hired muscle could touch me, and I let them learn it the expensive way. But it wasn't the strength that mattered. It was the look on Yoojin's face afterward, the way she watched me and saw, for the first time, exactly how far I'd go and exactly what it cost me to do it. "You didn't have to come," she whispered. I didn't answer, because we both knew that was the one thing I couldn't do. Jae-won stood in the wreckage of his office, his hands steady on the ledgers, and he said the thing that changed the count. "They'll be back," he said, "and I'll still be here when they are." Just like that, a bookkeeper who'd never asked for any of it became the fourth name on a list I'd never wanted to grow. Not a soldier, but a man who'd chosen the printer over the ones trying to burn him. That night, on the rooftop, I finally admitted what I'd known since the first bill and been too afraid to say. There was no way out, not out and not back. Every path I could see led through the same fire. The heir's desperation, the bank's machine, the meter at the edge of my eye that only ever climbed. You can't unhook a fuse. You can only run faster than it burns. "The only way out is through," I said, and the words settled over the city like a decision. Through the hunt, through the heat, through every man and woman who'd ever looked at a broke kid and decided he was worth less than the money in his pocket. I'd spent my whole life running from men like Jinwoo and Chairman O. The only thing that had ever changed was that now, finally, I was fast enough not to. Too powerful to freeze, too fast to catch. I'd heard the phrase in my own head 100 times, but it wasn't a wish anymore. It was the only door left standing. The system's panel glowed steady in the dark, patient as ever, and I made the choice that had been waiting for me since the eviction notice. I would keep climbing until the men who owned the money had to look up to see me, or I'd burn out trying, with everyone I loved behind me instead of in front. Across the city, Shin Seo-yeon stood in her kitchen with my file open in her hands, and she held it over the flame of her stove and didn't let go. The evidence was thin enough that a careful investigator could make it disappear, thin enough that a careful investigator could also make it enough. The difference that night wasn't in the papers, it was in her. I didn't know it then, couldn't know it, but the woman who'd hunted me hardest was standing at the edge of a choice no one had ever offered her. Duty on one side, the law, the bank, the years of being the sharpest mind in the room, and on the other, something she couldn't name yet, a doubt that had started the moment she'd seen a broke kid with honest eyes and a reason to be angry, sitting across from her like he'd already lost everything worth losing. The flame flickered under the paper. For a long moment she didn't move, and the whole war hung there in the heat of it, balanced on the question of whether a hunter burns the truth or follows it. Then, slowly, she pulled the file back from the fire, not because she'd decided, because she wasn't done looking yet, and something in her, against every instinct, wanted to see what I'd become before she chose which of us burned. The hunt stopped being quiet the morning the task force rolled through the city in broad daylight, and I watched it from a rooftop with the taste of something cold in my mouth. They weren't wearing plain clothes anymore, or pretending to be anything but what they were. The bank had decided subtlety was costing more than it saved, and the net was suddenly visible for what it was, a citywide dragnet with my name on it. HEAT jumped to 40 before the sun was fully up, the biggest single climb I'd ever felt, and it hit me like a wall of sound. 40 out of 100. The system had been warning me since the first bill that this was coming,
And here it was, no longer a number in the corner of my eye, but men with badges walking my streets, checking my routes, watching every corner I'd ever learned to hide in. "They're done pretending," Min-soo said when I found her. And she said it without fear, the way a doctor names a disease. From here on, it's war. I'd spent so long treating heat as a slow fuse, something I could outrun with one more rank, one more realm. Now the fuse was in the open, burning in daylight, and the whole city could see it. For 3 days, I was hunted across the city, and I learned what a man learns when every door has eyes. Every spend was traced, every pill was a marker, every step I took was mirrored by someone with a radio and a job to do. The routes Myung-hwan had kept dark for 30 years went bright one by one, because the bank wasn't looking for my money anymore. They were looking for me. I ate standing up and slept in 4 different places, and started to feel the shape of the machine closing, the way a fish feels the net before it tightens. Heat climbed to 44, and each tick was a person I'd have to leave behind, a place I couldn't return to, a door that closed and stayed closed. The city I'd grown up in, the only city I knew, was turning into a map of where I couldn't go. That was when the truth finally broke over me, cold and clean. The danger was no longer mine alone. Every person who'd ever taken my money, my protection, my friendship, they were all standing in the net now, whether they knew it or not. I'd told myself I was protecting them by getting stronger, but the closer the hunters came to me, the closer they came to everyone I'd ever touched. The so what of the hunt was written in the people I loved, and I couldn't look away from it anymore. Yoon-soo's lab was watched. Yoojin's street was circled. Even So-yeon, the hunter herself, had been assigned to the same blocks I moved through, pulled into my orbit by the very case she was building. Proximity to me had become a crime with my face on it. I tried to push them away. God knows I tried. I told Yoon-soo to bury the routes, told Yoojin to stay with a cousin 2 districts over, told myself the noble thing was to be alone with the fire I'd lit. But they looked at me the way you look at a man who still doesn't understand what family means, and I knew before I finished the sentence that it wouldn't take. "You don't get to decide who stands with you," Yoojin said, and Yoon-soo didn't even bother to argue. She just kept packing her kit. The 3 of them, the alchemist, the friend, the investigator who had no idea she was becoming one of them, were closing around me whether I wanted it or not, and the terrifying thing was how much I needed it to be true. I gave them every reason to go, and I meant each one. The bank, the task force, the meter at 44 that would only climb. "Staying near me is the most dangerous thing in this city," I told them, and I heard the plea in my own voice, the thing I'd spent 21 years too proud to let out. "Please, don't make me watch them take you too." Yoon-soo looked at me over her glasses and said, "Then climb faster." Yoojin crossed her arms and said, "We've been watching them take us our whole lives, Min-soo. At least now we get to watch it standing." And I understood, in that moment, that I'd never once been the one protecting them. They'd been protecting me, every one of them, since long before the printer. Outside, on the street below, Shin Seo-yeon was walking the same block, her sleek suit bright against the gray, unknowingly closing the last of the distance between the hunter and the hunted. 3 women, 3 kinds of strength, all orbiting the same broke kid with the same burning secret, and none of them, not one, willing to step out of the blast radius. That was the day I stopped fighting it and started being worthy of it. For the first time, they acted as one, and it was a thing to see. Yoon-soo rerouted the supply lines around the task force's eyes, the way a river finds a way around a stone. Yoojin read the street, which faces were bank, which were bought, which corner was safe for one more hour. And somewhere out in the city, So-yeon was doing her own kind of protecting, narrowing the hunt away from the innocent people caught in it, even if she couldn't have named why. I stood in the middle of it and felt something I'd never felt before, not even at Master's Peak. The shape of people moving around me in the dark, not because I'd paid them, but because they'd decided I was worth the risk. The alchemist's mind, the friend's nerve, the investigator's sharp, unknowing care. 3 different weapons, 1 target, and for once, the target wasn't me. It was the relationship I'd never earned and couldn't repay. The thing the money was always supposed to buy and never could. Loyalty doesn't come out of a printer. It comes out of standing in the same fire as someone and refusing to let them burn alone. And standing there,
With the city's net tightening around all of us, I finally understood what the system had been trying to tell me since the first bill. Allies aren't a resource, they're the whole game.
And in the middle of the hunt, at the moment the net was tightest,
I did the thing nobody expected a hunted man to do. I broke through again. Power 98215 to 204772, and the rank that had been Master rolled over to Grandmaster, with a flare so bright I half expected the whole task force to see it through the walls. The quota leapt, the city's pressure rebalanced, and for a heartbeat, I was the most dangerous thing in it.
the timing was deliberate, and that was the point.
You don't hide a Grandmaster's ascent, you let them see it. Every Nan with a badge in the city had to know, in that moment, that the ghost printer they were closing on had just grown teeth they couldn't pay to remove. Heat ticked to 46, because power like that doesn't rise in secret. It rises like a second sun, and the bank had no choice but to squint into it.
But the so what followed me out of the shrine like a shadow. A Grandmaster is harder to catch and harder to ignore, and the cartel had just learned both at once. The escalation I'd been dreading was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty, already in motion, because the men who own the money don't wait for a rival to get comfortable. They move first. The cartel switched from surveillance to force the same day,
and the city felt it like a drop in pressure before a storm. The watchers with radios became enforcers with weapons, men whose job was no longer to follow me, but to end me. The thin legal fiction that had kept the hunt clean was dropped, because a Grandmaster is past the point where you can afford to be polite.
and while the bank armed itself, the Cha family crumbled under the strain, the way old money always does when the tide turns.
Jinwoo's allies vanished, his father's empire hemorrhaged, and the heir who'd once laughed at my score of 2 was left standing in an emptying estate, watching the last of his servants walk out with the silver. The bank had used him and was now done with him, and he knew it.
I almost felt it then, the symmetry of it.
The rich boy and the broke kid, both of us at the mercy of the same machine, one climbing out of its shadow and one falling into it. But I didn't have room for pity anymore. The men coming for me had guns now. The meter in my eye was at 46, and the only thing that mattered was staying ahead of both.
Then I learned the cartel's endgame,
And it was colder than anything I'd imagined. They didn't want to catch me, and they didn't want to kill me, not really. They wanted the printer. The whole war, the task force, the freeze, the heir's desperate pawn play, had been a way to take the mint system for themselves, to seize the one machine that could print money faster than they could hold it.
I saw it in a briefing I wasn't supposed to have,
The words laid out in the chairman's own cold hand. Not destroy the counterfeiter, but acquire the asset. That was the real prize all along. A man who can print money is a threat, but a man who owns a money printer is a king. And Chairman O had spent his whole life becoming the kind of man who'd burn a city to be that king.
They don't want to stop me, I said to Yoon-seo,
And my voice sounded strange in my own ears, like I'd just walked off a ledge and found more ledge. They want to become me. It changed the shape of everything. The hunt wasn't a punishment. It was a siege, laid against a machine the cartel meant to take by force, and the only thing standing between them and it was me.
That night, I started to think the unthinkable,
And it came on slow, the way real dangers do. The enemy wasn't Jinwoo, and it wasn't even Chairman O. It was the system of money itself, the thing that had made me a broke loser long before it made me a counterfeiter, the thing that priced my mother's medicine and my rent and my dignity and found me short every time.
I'd thought the mint system was a weapon I'd been given to fight the rich,
But standing there with a Grandmaster's power and a cartel at my door, I began to see it differently. The printer wasn't the answer to the money system. It was the question, the thing that revealed, by existing, that the whole apparatus was a rigged game, and that every man who'd ever called me worthless had been one of its dealers.
The money itself, I whispered, is the enemy.
The words felt too big for the rooftop, too big for me, but they wouldn't go back in. A broke kid with a score of 2 had wanted only to be worth something. A Grandmaster with a printer and a city on his heels was starting to want something the rich would never allow, a world where worth wasn't printed at all.
Deep in the night, Shin Seo-yeon finished the proof she'd been building since the first anomaly,
And the last piece clicked into place with a sound only she could hear. It was all there, the serials, the timing, the face she'd met at the cafe, the broke kid who'd become a grandmaster on money that didn't exist. The case was closed. The ghost printer was Choi Min-soo.
And then, sitting alone with the file that would end me, she saw the second thing, the thing no one had asked her to see.
Arresting me wouldn't end the counterfeiting. It would hand the printer to the cartel. The same men who'd signed her checks would take the machine and turn it into the very thing she'd spent her career hunting. Not a forger, but a state-sponsored money printer with the law for a shield.
The proof was complete, and it changed everything,
because the truth she'd found was bigger than the case. The law she served and the cartel that owned it were the same animal, and the man she'd been sent to destroy was the only thing standing between them and a weapon that would own the world. She closed the file and stared at the wall for a long time, and somewhere in that long arc, the hunter began to ask a question she'd never been allowed to ask. Whose side was the law on, and what was she willing to burn to find out?
I didn't see the room where it happened,
But I've rebuilt it 100 times since. Shin Seo-yun, alone in the bank's counterfeiting division after midnight. The case file opened to the page she'd been chasing for months. Ink, serial numbers, the source. The arrest order sat in front of her, the pen already in her hand.
She was the best the bank had,
and she'd earned it by never once looking away. All she had to do was sign, and the ghost printer was finished. But she didn't sign. She sat there, the sharpest mind in the building, reading the one page that didn't fit the file. That page told the truth about who'd been hurt by the money and who'd been hurt by the men hunting it. Yoon Seo had a contact in that building, and he told me afterward what it looked like. A cold woman staring at the proof, realizing the law and the men the law served were two different things.
The system warned me before anyone else did.
Heat, 47, started climbing the moment her pen touched the page, the numbers rolling upward like a fever, 47 to 64 in a single breath. Not because I'd printed anything new, because the choice she was making would swing my whole operation into the light.
I'd spent months reading heat the way a sailor
Reads weather. A slow climb meant I was being watched. A jump like this meant a door had opened somewhere, and everything on the other side of it was already moving. I didn't yet know whether she was the door or the thing stepping through it.
Yoon Seo stood at the window with her arms crossed,
watching the city the way she watched a titration, waiting for the color to turn. She's deciding, she said, and whatever she decides, the war starts tonight. She was right. I could feel it, the way a floor tilts before it gives.
She walked out of the bank past 3 in the morning with the file held against her chest like it might burn her, and I was waiting on the curb with my hood up. I'd come to stop her, or to turn myself in. I hadn't decided which. Instead, she stopped, looked at me through the rain, and said my name. Choi Min-soo, she said, not like a question.
The broke kid from the slum, Vitality 2. She knew everything, and she'd still walked out alone. I read who the money was really hurting, she said. It wasn't the bank. It was never the bank. Then she handed me the file, all of it, the proof.
That was the moment the hunt ended and something else began.
The woman sent to destroy me chose the truth instead, and just like that, she was one of us. Not a hunter at my back, but a woman standing at my side in the rain. The system logged it the way it logs everything. 4 allies became 5.
We went somewhere out of the rain,
a tea house that never closes, where nobody looks twice at 2 people with a secret. She asked the one question that mattered, and it wasn't about the ink or the cereals. Why, she said. Why would a man with nothing print money he knew would mark him?
So I told her, not the clever version,
the true one. The eviction notice, the examiner who'd stamped 2 without looking up. My mother's hands, 3 years of being the city's punchline. I'd printed the money because the world had already priced me out of living, and the only way up was to buy my way.
She listened the way she investigates,
completely, without a single tell. When I finished, she turned her cup slowly and said the thing I didn't expect. I've spent years locking up men like you, she said, and I never once saw a rich man in the dock, only broke ones. That was when I knew. She'd started to see it.
The money didn't stop because the hunt did.
The printer never stops. With Yoon Seo's formulas and Yoo-jin watching the door, I cycled the breakthrough I'd been saving, burning spirit stones bought with a fresh run of bills. 204,772. Then the number broke loose.
410,338. I felt it the way you feel a wall fall inside you, a whole Grandmaster realm tipping over, and the room went still. The world would watch now. The guild towers had instruments for a climb like that, and every one of them would be ringing. That was the trade the printer always demanded. Power in one hand, exposure in the other. Every stone I burned was paid for in traceable bills, and every breakthrough lit a beacon. I didn't care anymore. If the cartel wanted to come, let them come. I was done being the broke kid who kept his head down. Chairman Oh Seung-woo did not take the news well. I heard it from So-yeon's sources, and later I saw the aftermath myself. He stood at the head of his boardroom, the man who owned the money supply, whose whole power was the currency itself, reading the report that a broke nobody was flooding his ledgers. "He's printing our end," Oh said, the way you'd announce an execution. The hunt had been a task force before. Now it became a war footing. The full weight of a financial cartel turning to crush one man. They didn't want to catch me anymore. They wanted me erased, and everyone who'd touched my money with me. I'd known the price was coming. Heat had told me for months, but hearing how fast the richest men in the city would burn everything to stop one printer, that was when I stopped being afraid of them. A man that scared of a broke kid with a machine isn't a king. He's watching the floor fall out from under him. Cha Jin-woo came to me next, and it was the strangest thing I'd ever seen. The heir who'd mocked my empty pockets for years stood in my doorway with a briefcase of his family's money, offering it to me. His eyes were wild. The Cha family was sinking, and he'd finally worked out I was the one holding the rope. "Take it," he said, and for once there was no sneer. "All of it. Just make them stop." I looked at the briefcase, real money, the kind he'd thrown away on dinners while I went hungry, and I understood something for the first time. His fortune couldn't buy a single thing from me anymore. I didn't take it. I looked at the man who'd spent his whole life believing money was birthright, and I told him the truth. I could print more than his family had ever held in an afternoon from nothing. "You never had worth," I said. "You had a bank balance. There's a difference." He had no answer. They never do. That night, with So-yeon's files spread across Yoon-seo's lab tables, I finally saw the whole shape of the thing I'd been fighting. It wasn't a bank, and it wasn't a family. The currency itself was the cartel, a closed loop where the men who minted it decided what everything and everyone was worth. "They don't hate you for the counterfeiting," So-yeon said, pointing at the ledgers. "They hate you because you proved money has no more value than they decide it does. A printer in a rented room just broke the only spell they had." Yoojin stayed quiet, but I saw her face. She'd always known it in her bones. Yoon-seo pushed her glasses up and said it plainest of all. "You didn't invent fake money, Min-soo. You invented money that doesn't answer to them." It was the truest thing anyone had said about the system since it appeared over my chest. I'd been printing bills, sure, but what I'd really been printing was the end of their monopoly. Before the war properly turned, the three of them closed ranks around me in a way I hadn't asked for and couldn't have earned. Yoon-seo with her formulas and her ruined family's name, Yoojin with her street sense and loyalty that had never once wavered. So-yeon, the hunter who'd burned her career to stand here. "We're all discarded," Yoojin said, looking out at the city. "The alchemist they threw away, the slum kid who stayed, the investigator who read the wrong file. Maybe that's why we fit." She smiled, that easy smile she'd kept through everything, and for the first time in years, it reached her eyes. I looked at the three of them, the curvy alchemist in her lab coat, the warm friend in her practical coat, the sharp investigator in her tailored suit, and understood what the system had been building. It wasn't just printing money, it was assembling the people the world had thrown away into something it couldn't ignore. The next morning, Chairman Oh went on every screen in the city and did the thing I'd been dreading. "Choi Min-soo," he said, calm as a man signing a warrant, "is hereby declared a public enemy. Every account, every front, every asset he has ever touched is frozen." The city went quiet the way a crowd goes quiet before a fight. They froze everything. My fronts, my brokers, the clean layers I'd spent months building, gone in an afternoon, because the man who owned the ledgers could simply decide they didn't exist. That was the cartel's real weapon. They didn't need to catch me. They just had to make the world stop taking my money. Watching my own face flash across the screens under the words public enemy, I felt something turn in me. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. This was the war the system had been counting toward since the first bill came out warm in my hands. The cartel had finally said it out loud. Now it was their turn to run out of time. The morning after the broadcast, the state moved like a machine, waiting for the order. Checkpoints went up at the guild gates. Every bank branch ran my face against a watch list, and the hunters who'd worked in shadow were suddenly out in the open, wearing badges and looking for me by name. Chairman O hadn't just labeled me. He'd redefined the whole city around me. Every front I'd built, every broker who'd laundered a bill, every account, frozen by noon, the way a man freezes a pond. The cartel didn't have to catch me, I realized again. They just had to make the world stop taking my money. And the worst part was how well it worked. By sunset, I'd learned the truth that hurts worst. When you fight the men who own the ledgers, they don't send soldiers first. They send arithmetic. My fortune was still there, printed and perfect, and nowhere in the city would touch it. Then the system told me the second cost, worse than the first. Heat, 64, climbed again, up to 81, and this time, it wasn't my spending doing it. The declaration had made everyone who'd helped me legally complicit, aiding a public enemy. Just knowing me was now a crime on their records. I looked at the three of them and felt the weight of it. Min-soo, whose family name was already ruined, now carried a fresh charge. Yoo-jin, who'd covered for me with paper trails, could go to prison for it. So-yeon had thrown away her career the night she handed me the file, and now the state called her a traitor. That's when I tried to push them away. It's the first instinct of a man who's never had anything. When the fire comes, you don't let it catch the people you love. I told them to leave, to go dark, to save themselves. Yoo-jin didn't even look up. Say it again, she said, when you actually mean it. I printed at the edge of the quota that night, right up to the line, and burned every bill's worth of resources in one push. The numbers ground upward as I cycled. 410,000, climbing. And I could feel the wall I'd been circling for weeks. Sovereign. The rank where a man stops being a resource and becomes a force. It broke. 688,521, and the rank flipped from Grandmaster to Sovereign, the way a lock turns. The chamber went white for half a second, and when my eyes cleared, I wasn't the man who'd walked in. The city's instruments would be screaming. They could hide a lot, but not this. I'd bought the breakthrough with counterfeit cash, at the edge of a quota, under a public enemy order, with heat at 81 and climbing. That was the deal, and I'd taken it with my eyes open. Power was never free in this city, but for the first time, I could afford the price and make them pay theirs. While I climbed, the three of them fought the war on three fronts, and it was a thing to watch. Min-soo worked her lab like a general, mixing breakthroughs from scraps, keeping the supply line alive with contacts she hadn't spoken to since her family fell. Every pill, every stone, she made the money worth something. Yoo-jin fought the street. She'd spent her life reading it, and now she moved through the slum the way only someone born there can, spreading word, finding the brokers who'd still take our cash, the stalls that would hide a man the state was hunting. Where the badges couldn't go, she was already there, quiet and smiling. So-yeon fought the law with the law. She knew every record, every judge, every clause, and she used them like a blade, filing challenges that slowed the freeze to a crawl. You can't beat the state by breaking its rules, she said, cold and composed. You beat it by making the rules bleed. The night I finally said it, we were around the table over a meal that cost almost nothing, because the freeze had taught us to eat like we were broke again, and maybe that was why the truth came out. I can't do this without you, I said, and it wasn't a speech. It was the fact I'd been running from since the first bill. I'd spent years telling myself that needing people was the same as being a burden, that a man who's never had anything should never ask for more than he can hold alone. But the printer had changed the math. Money could buy strength, sure. What it couldn't buy was the three of them standing in the fire with me, not flinching. Min-soo looked at me over her glasses. Yoo-jin reached across the table and took my hand without a word. So-yeon just nodded once, like I'd finally said something she'd been waiting to hear. Took you long enough, Yoo-jin said, and for the first time in days, somebody laughed. Hunted, broke, and together.
It was enough.
Then the ground shifted under the cartel.
And this time, it wasn't me. Seo Yeon's files, the proof she'd risked everything to take, held a twin set of ledgers the cartel had tried to bury, their own counterfeiting. Not like mine. Theirs was the quiet kind, the kind that devalues a currency so the men at the top can buy back the ruins cheap.
It leaked. I don't know who exactly.
A clerk with a conscience, a rival family, someone the cartel had discarded one too many times. But once the ledgers hit the street, the city read them like a mirror. The people who'd called me a monster were suddenly doing the math on the men who'd been calling me one.
That was the day the public began to turn.
Not because they loved me, they barely knew me, but for the first time, they could see the shape of the machine that had been stepping on their throats for a century, and it had a name, and it wasn't Choi Min-soo. The city was finally asking who'd been lying.
Looking out over the city that night, I finally saw it.
I'd thought I was the discarded one, the broke kid with the score of 2, the punchline, but the whole city was full of us. The slums I'd grown up in, the workers the guilds paid in dust, the clerks and porters the rich families threw away once they stopped being useful.
The cartel hadn't made me poor.
It had priced an entire city out of its own life, then taught everyone to blame the broke ones for not keeping up. The examiner who'd stamped 2 on my card wasn't cruel. She was just reading a number the system had already decided. We'd all been discarded and told it was our fault.
That was when the war stopped being about me.
It was never really about me, if I'm honest. It was about a machine that prints people into worthlessness, the way I print money into existence, and a city that had finally, after 100 years, started to ask what it was worth. I wasn't the enemy. I was just the first one with a printer.
So I did the one thing a hunted man isn't supposed to do.
I walked into the light, the guild courtyard where Jin-woo had mocked my score of 2 all those years ago. I went back, stood where I'd once kept my head down, and let them see me. No hood, no running. Just me and the mint green panel floating at my shoulder.
You're looking for the ghost printer, I said to the crowd, and to every camera the state had trained on me. I'm right here. You could have heard a pin drop in a city that had been hunting me for months. The system pulsed once, quiet and patient. Being seen on my own terms was the one thing the cartel could never take. The cartel wanted me unmasked as a criminal.
I unmasked myself as a man. There's a difference, and the crowd felt it, even if half were too afraid to say so. The broke loser they'd all agreed was worthless stood in the open, outnumbered and unafraid, asking no one's permission. That image spread faster than any wanted poster.
After the unmasking, the hunt changed shape.
The crowds that had watched the manhunt like a sport started watching it like a verdict. Wanted posters went up and came down torn. The stalls that had frozen me out began slipping me news, hiding a runner, leaving a door unlocked. Small defiances, the way a city wakes up.
The cartel sent more men, harder men.
But there's a difference between hunting a ghost and hunting a man half the city has decided to believe in. Every raid hit heir. Every informant came up empty. The war I'd been losing on arithmetic started to turn on a feeling. The city had stopped being afraid of the money masters.
It wasn't a hunt anymore. It was a reckoning,
100 years overdue. I didn't start it. The first bill started it, or maybe the first examiner who'd stamped a number on a child's future did. I just happened to be holding the printer when the fuse ran out, and the men who'd owned everything would answer for all of it.
Then, at the very end of his power,
Chairman O called me himself, not through a lawyer or a task force, direct, his voice calm and hollow down the secure line, the way a man sounds when he's out of moves except the last one. Choi Min-soo, he said, this can end. We can make it all go away.
Legitimacy, he said.
A license, protection, a clean name. Every charge dropped, every freeze lifted, every door reopened. In exchange, the printer. Give us the system and you walk away a legal man. I could hear when it cost him, the way ice cracks under a foot. The richest man in the city, begging a broke kid for his machine.
I didn't answer right away. I let the silence sit there,
and I thought about everything it would buy. A clean name was the one thing my money had never been able to print. But I'd heard enough of Chairman O by then. He didn't want to save me. He wanted to own the machine that had nearly ended him. And that I'd never sell.
Chairman O laid the contract out himself in a meeting room on neutral ground.
a dozen of his men outside, and none willing to meet my eyes. A license, protection, a clean name, printed on real paper, signed by the man who owned the money supply. All of it, he said, for the printer. I'd been a broke kid long enough to know what a clean name was worth. It was the one thing my counterfeit fortune had never been able to buy, the asset that turns a wanted man legitimate. No more running, no more freeze, no more heat climbing. Just sign and the war ended. The whole time he talked, I watched his hands. Steady, but too careful, the way a man's hands get when he's holding a losing hand and pretending otherwise. Chairman O didn't want peace. He wanted the machine that had nearly ended him, and he offered the one thing he knew a broke man couldn't refuse. The offer sat on my table like a loaded thing, and while it sat there, heat kept climbing, 81 to 93, grinding toward a ceiling I'd spent the year dreading. Taking the deal would have stopped it cold. A legal man has no exposure meter. Refusing meant riding the number to the top. That was the temptation, and the sharpest yet, because it wasn't wearing a mask. It wasn't money. I could print money. It wasn't power. I'd climbed past fear. It was the chance to be normal again, to hand the fuse to someone else and walk away with a name that didn't burn. I almost took it. I want that on the record, because it's true, and the truth of it is what made the refusal matter. The longer I looked at the contract, the clearer the fine print got. The license wasn't freedom, it was a leash, held by the men who'd priced my city into the gutter. Signing would make me them. I tore it in half in front of him, slow, deliberate, down the middle of the signature block, and I watched the blood drain out of Chairman O's face as his last door closed with a sound like a vault ceiling. The printer was never the point, I told him. The freedom was, and you can't buy freedom from the man who owns the cage. For a long second, the room was dead quiet, and I could see him deciding whether to have his men take me anyway. But they'd seen the numbers, they'd all seen the numbers, and nobody moved. That's the thing about climbing to the edge of God tier. You stop being someone a room can just decide to grab. You think this is the end? O said, his voice thin. You've only just begun to understand what we'll do to stop you. But his hands had started to shake, and I'd been broke long enough to recognize a man bluffing with nothing left to bet. I understand plenty, I said. That's not a threat. That's a man watching his monopoly die. That night, the three of them told me what freedom meant, each in her own language, and it's the conversation I'll keep from the whole war. Min-soo talked about doing her alchemy without a sect's permission, without a family's ruin over every formula. Freedom is a lab no one can close, she said, pushing up her glasses. Yujin talked about walking down her own street without bracing for what the day would take. To eat when she was hungry, to look a rich man in the eye. Freedom's just not being scared of tomorrow, she said, soft. And I knew she meant it for me too, because she'd watched me be scared of tomorrow my whole life. Seo Yan was last and the coldest, because she'd spent her career on the other side of the word. Freedom is the law finally doing its job, she said. Not for the rich who wrote it, but for everyone else. 3 different answers, and not one of them was money. That's how I knew I'd torn up the right contract. With the deal dead and the cartel cornered, I pushed. Not with fear this time, with everything the year had taught me. The quota was mine to the last bill, and I spent it all, cycling until the chamber hummed. The number climbed toward the ceiling of sovereign, 912,000, and the city held its breath. I could feel the wall above it, the last wall, the one between a sovereign and a celestial, the difference between a force and a god. I didn't break it that night. I pressed right up against it, close enough to feel the heat through the stone, and I stopped. Not because I couldn't, because the next push was something you become. But even at the threshold, the power in me was enough to tilt a city. The instruments at the guild towers were ringing off the hook, and every family in the cartel knew what it meant. The broke loser with the score of 2 was 1 step from the ceiling of the world, and the men who'd owned that world couldn't hold it. The collapse came faster than anyone expected, the way a structure falls once the one beam holding it snaps. Without the legitimacy deal, Chairman O had nothing left to offer his allies, and allies built on fear don't stay bought. The cartel's families peeled away, cutting deals, throwing each other to the wolves. And then there was Jin Woo, the heir who'd mocked my empty pockets in front of a courtyard, who'd spent his life believing money was birthright, came to me at the end and knelt. Actually knelt in the dust outside his family's ruined estate. I'd imagined that moment for years. When it came, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like watching a band finally understand something I'd learned in the slum long ago. Worth was never about the money, and the second the money was gone, so was everything he thought he was. I didn't gloat. I just said what I wished someone had said to me years earlier. Now you get to find out who you are without it. Then I turned the printer on their hoard. It was the one trick they never saw coming, because they'd never imagined the machine pointed at them. I didn't print money to spend. I printed money to drown them in it. Enough counterfeit, fast enough, that their hoarded fortunes became worthless overnight. That was the whole lesson of the mint system, turned back on its masters. The cartel had spent a century convincing the world that money's value was real and sacred. But value was always just a story the men at the top got to tell. And now the story had a new author standing in their vault. The black money, the bribes, the buried accounts, the fortunes stashed against a rainy day, flooded into worthlessness, and the families who'd lived on it for generations watched their world go soft in their hands. They'd spent my life pricing people out of existence. Now they knew what it felt like. The man who made it possible was named Kang Do-hyun, and I'll remember him as long as I remember any of it. He'd kept the cartel's books for 20 years, every hidden account, every buried crime, every name. And when the structure cracked, he did the one thing the cartel never saw coming. He walked the ledgers over to us. He was 41, gray at the temples, with the tired face that comes from 20 years of writing down other people's sins. They discarded me the moment I became a liability, he said, setting the ledgers down like a man setting down a load. Seemed only right to become a very expensive liability on my way out. Those ledgers were the end of the cartel. Every frozen account, every hidden hoard, every man who'd thought his crimes were buried, all of it, laid out in Do-hyun's careful hand. He didn't ask for money. He asked to be one of us, and the discarded had another of their own. 5 allies became 6. That night, with the cartel in ruins, in the city holding its breath, I stood alone on the rooftop and felt it waiting. The God-tier score, the number the whole story had been counting toward, the 100 times power the hook had promised a broke loser. It wasn't mine yet, but it was so close I could feel it breathing. 912,000. One more push, one more wall, and the machine that had started as $240 on a mattress would finish what it started. I didn't rush it. Some numbers you earn slowly, but I knew, the way you know the sun's coming up, that the next time I cycled, the world would tip. Below me, the city that had called me worthless was starting to say my name without the sneer, and the 3 women were asleep somewhere behind me. And for the first time since the examiner stamped 2 on my card, I let myself believe it had all been leading somewhere. Not to the money, to this. But as the dust settled, one question surfaced through the quiet, and it wouldn't let me go. I was back in the rented room where it started. The mattress, the window, the exact spot where the green light first bloomed. The system had been with me through everything, and I'd never asked where it came from. Who builds a money printer? Not a bank. Banks don't want more money. They want the monopoly on it. Not a rival family. They'd never arm a broke kid with the weapon that ends them all. Something else had put that panel in the dark for me. Something that had been watching me fail for a long time. The panel pulsed once in the dark, quiet and patient, like it had been waiting for me to finally ask the question. And for the first time since it appeared, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with heat or the cartel or the men who'd hunted me. The money was mine. The power was mine. But the machine, that was somebody's too. In the end, I remember all of it like it happened in a single breath. The courtyard where Jin-woo mocked a score of 2. The rented room with the eviction notice on the door. The first bill coming out warm in my hands, heat ticking from 0 to 1, and me laughing in the dark because a number was finally working for me. I remember the pills that made my vitality tick up for the first time, and Min-soo smelling the value in them and asking too many questions, and Yoo-jin standing in a doorway, terrified of what the money would turn me into, and So-yeon, the hunter, reading the one page that didn't fit and handing me the proof instead of the arrest. A broke loser, a money printer, 3 women the world had thrown away, and a climb from 2 points to the edge of God tier. That was the whole story, measured in bills and breakthroughs in heat, and it was about to end the way it started, with a number on a screen in the dark, and me deciding what it meant.
The finale happened where it all began, in the guild courtyard, at dawn, with the whole city watching. Jinwoo knelt first. The heir who'd spent years teaching me my place was on his knees in front of everyone, and this time there was no performance in it, just a man at the end of a long fall, looking up at the broke kid he'd kicked. Chairman O was finished, not arrested, not executed, finished, which was worse for a man like him. The money supply he'd owned for decades had slipped out of his hands like water, and what was left of the cartel had scattered to cut their own deals. The man who'd owned everything was left with the one thing money can't replace: nothing. And the discarded walked with their heads up. The porters, the clerks, the alchemists the sex had thrown away, the slum kids who'd grown up believing they were worth whatever number a machine stamped on them, they filled the courtyard and watched, and for the first time, nobody told them to get out of the way. The new order held, and that was the real victory. Not the kneeling, but the days after it. The freeze lifted, the markets reopened, money moved through the city again, and this time like a tool, not a collar. A man could be paid for his work and keep the value of it. A broke kid could afford a pill without selling his future. I didn't rule anything. I'd never wanted to. The cartel had ruled, and the city had learned what that cost. What took its place was messier and better. 100,000 small decisions instead of one man's. The kind of order nobody owns and nobody can freeze. The system didn't print that. People built it. But it held, and that was the point. Money was a tool again, a way to trade work for worth, instead of a weapon the rich aimed at everyone below them. I'd spent my whole life being priced out of the world. Now the world's price had been reset, and the number on a man's card wasn't his ceiling anymore. Then I broke the last wall, and the story paid off the number it had promised from the start. I cycled with everything I had, every bill, every stone, every lesson, and the wall between Sovereign and Celestial came down like a dam. 998,574. The 100 times power. The rank flipped to Celestial, the top of a ladder I'd started at the very bottom of, and the chamber went white and stayed white for a long, still moment. When it cleared, I wasn't the man who'd walked in. I was the man the whole city had been watching climb, standing at the ceiling of the world. The system logged the final state the way it had logged the first, and I read it slowly, because some numbers you want to see with your own eyes. Power, 998,574. Rank, Celestial. Heat, 100. Allies, 6. A broke loser with a score of 2 had rewritten the rules. And when it was over, when there was no one left to run from and no war to fight, the 3 of them stayed. That was the part that mattered most, and I almost missed it because I'd spent so long counting the wrong things. Yoon-seo stayed, not for the money, but because she'd finally built a lab no one could close. Yoo-jin stayed, and when I asked her why, she laughed that easy laugh and said, "Because somebody has to make sure you eat." But I saw the truth under it. She'd stayed before there was anything to stay for, back when I was just the broke kid with the score of 2 and a mattress on the floor. She was never going to leave. Seo-yeon stayed too, and hers was the one I hadn't dared hope for. "I hunted you for a year," she said, with that cold, unreadable face finally cracking into something like a smile. "It would be a waste of a year not to see what you do next." 3 women, worth more than all the money I'd printed, and all 3 chose to stay. The money masters knelt last, all of them, in a line, and it wasn't to own me, and it wasn't even for mercy. It was because they could no longer afford to oppose me, and for men like them, that's the only arithmetic that matters. The families who priced a city into the gutter knelt before the broke kid they'd mocked. I didn't make them grovel. I'd spent too long hating the rich to want to become the thing I hated, and kneeling men are just men who've learned nothing. But I did make them listen. I made them hear what a century of their money had cost, the examiner's stamps, the eviction notices, the kids who'd gone hungry so a number could go up. Then I told them the only condition I'd ever wanted, the one I'd have printed the money for, even if there'd been no power in it. Never again, I said. No more pricing people out of their own lives.
And one by one, because they had no choice left, and because some of them had even heard me, they agreed. Worth was never about money.
The fortune turned out to be the byproduct. I'd printed $483 million, and I'd have burned it all to keep what came out of the war. Because the legacy wasn't the money, it was the discarded, walking tall, Yoon-soo's students, Yoojin's neighbors, the clerks and porters who'd stopped apologizing. I watched it from a rooftop one afternoon, the way I used to watch the city when I had nothing and it had everything. Now the slums had new shops, the guilds paid their porters in real money, and the kids who'd have been stamped 2 were told to try again because the number wasn't the verdict anymore. That was the thing I'd built.
The money was just fuel. It had always been just fuel. A way to buy the pills and stones and manuals that turned a nobody into something. But the point was never the power either. The point was that a system that prices people into worthlessness is worth breaking. And a broke kid with a printer was the only one to think, why not me?
I'm not the broke loser anymore. That's the strange part, the part I'm getting used to. I walk past the courtyard where Jinwoo mocked me, and I don't flinch. Because the score of 2 isn't a brand anymore. It's just the first line of a story that turned out differently. The man who's not broke isn't a different man. He's the same one. Yoojin understood it before I did, the way she's always understood things before I did. You know what I was afraid of back then, she said, sitting there with me? Not the money. I was afraid you'd believe them, that you'd start thinking your worth was the number on a screen too, just a bigger one. She stayed to make sure I didn't. That's the proof, in the end, if anyone ever asks. Worth was never about the money, not the $2 and not the $483 million. It was about the people who saw a broke kid with a score of 2 and stayed anyway. The money bought the power, and the power bought the world. The worth was there the whole time. The heat meter is locked at 100 now, and it doesn't scare me anymore. I used to read that number the way a hunted man reads a clock. Every tick a step closer to the banks and the guns and the men who owned the money supply. Now it sits at the top of the screen, full and still, like a gauge that's finished measuring. Because at the end of it, heat at 100 stopped meaning exposure. It meant everyone knew. The ghost printer, the public enemy, the broke kid with the score of 2. The number wasn't a warning anymore. It was a name the whole city knew. You can't threaten a man with being found when he's already the most famous man in the country. The system had warned me, back in the rented room, that heat never resets and only climbs. I'd spent a year afraid. Now I understood what it had really been doing, writing my name into the word, one bill at a time, until there was nowhere left for the men who'd owned everything to hide. Heat was never the fuse, it was the billboard. But far below the world's ledgers, in a place the banks and the cartels and the city never knew existed, something stirred. It had been waiting, for a century, for longer than a century, for a broke kid in a rented room to work out what the machine was for. And now that the world knew my name, it opened its eyes. The question I'd asked on that rooftop never got answered. Who builds a money printer? Who designs a machine that forges currency from nothing, arms the weakest man in the city, and counts every bill toward a reckoning? Nobody builds that by accident. Something built it on purpose and aimed it at a world that priced itself into ruin. The panel in my room flickered once, the first time it had ever done anything I didn't ask it to. And in that flicker I felt it, the way you feel a door open below you. The war was over, the climb was done, but the machine had never been mine. It had a purpose, and it had an architect, and they'd just found out the printer worked.